If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
You are listening to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and today we are tackling one of the most baffling mysteries in history. The mystery of the Somerton Man, also known as the Tamum Shud case. Now, in Australia, supposedly everyone will know what you're talking about when you bring up this case. Outside of Australia, like myself, I actually had not heard of this until a very astute Mindshock patron requested this case, and wow. This is, this case is absolutely incredible. It is perplexing with so many layers. I mean, it's like 10 spy novels in one. I mean, many consider it, of course, the most infamous case of an unidentified victim. And, I mean, everything from whether or not this guy was even murdered, and since this is Mindshock, I will be going down every single rabbit hole, including interdimensional and time travelers. Because a question that not enough people ask, if there are interdimensional or time travelers, like what would happen if they had an accident in our time or dimension and they died, their bodies recovered? I mean, if they appear to be a regular human, the men in black wouldn't necessarily swoop in, particularly if, or whatever country they're in. So there's a lot of unanswered questions in this case, and we will be looking at it in typical Mindshock fashion with logic and reason at the forefront, attempting not to fall for any logical fallacies. As always, if you find the podcast interesting and informative and entertaining, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help support Mindshock. Help us get more mind-shocking content out there. Cover more and more cases in comprehensive and exhaustive fashion, unlike any other podcast out there. You can also become a member on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon, and patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comments section. Alright, so there is quite a bit to go over. I'm going to go down the wiki rundown here just to lay down the foundation and the basic general concepts of the case, and then we will be going all the way up to new information, which many believe will lead to the case being solved not just soon, but this year. So, the Tamum Shud case, also known as the mystery of the Somerton Man, is an unsolved case of an unidentified man found dead in 1948 on the Somerton Park Beach, just south of Adelaide, South Australia. The case is named after the Persian phrase Tamum Shud, meaning is over or is finished, which was printed on a scrap of paper found months later in the fob pocket of the man's trousers. The scrap had been torn from the final page of a copy of Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, authored by the 12th century poet Omar Khayyam. Tamam was misspelt as Tamam was misspelt as Taman in early reports, and this error has often been repeated, leading to confusion about the name in the media. Following a public appeal by police, the book from which the page had been torn was located. On the inside back cover, detectives read through indentations left from previous handwriting, a local phone number, another unidentified number, and a text that resembled an encrypted message. The text has not been deciphered or interpreted in a way that satisfies authorities on the case. The case has been considered, since the early stages of the police investigation, one of Australia's most profound mysteries. There's been intense speculation ever since regarding the identity of the victim, the cause of death, the events leading up to it. Public interest in the case remains significant for several reasons. The death occurred at a time of heightened international tensions following the beginning of the Cold War, the apparent involvement of a secret code, the possible use of an undetectable poison, and the inability of authorities to identify the dead man. In addition to intense public interest in Australia during the late 40s and early 50s, the case also attracted international attention. The South Australian police consulted their counterparts overseas and distributed information about the dead man internationally in an effort to identify him. International circulation of a photograph of the man and details of his fingerprints yielded no positive identification. For example, in the US, the FBI was unable to match the dead man's fingerprint with prints taken from files of domestic criminals. Scotland Yard was also asked to assist with the case, but could not offer any insights. In recent years, additional evidence has emerged, including an old identification card possibly identifying the Somerton Man as one H.C. Reynolds, and an ongoing DNA analysis of hair roots found on the plaster bust. On May 19th, 2021, after a series of requests, the body was exhumed for analysis. Police stated that the remains were in reasonable condition and were optimistic about the prospect of DNA recovery. So, let's go through the timeline here. The discovery of the body on December 1st, 1948 at 6:30 a.m., the police were contacted after the body of a man was discovered on Somerton Park Beach near Glenelg, about 7 miles southwest of Adelaide, South Australia. The man was found lying in the sand across from the crippled children's home, which was on the corner of the Esplanade and Bickford Terrace. He was lying back with his head resting against the seawall with his legs extended and his feet crossed. It was believed the man had died while sleeping. An unlit cigarette was on the right collar of his coat. A search of his pockets revealed an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a bus ticket from the city that may not have been used, a narrow aluminum comb that had been manufactured in the U.S., a half-empty packet of juicy fruit chewing gum, an army cigarette packet which contained 7 cigarettes of a different brand, Ken Sitas, and a quarter-full box of Bryant and May matches. Witnesses who came forward said on the evening of November 30th they had seen an individual resembling the dead man lying on his back in the same spot and position near the crippled children's home where the corpse was later found. A couple who saw him at around 7 p.m. noted that they saw him extend his right arm to its fullest extent and then drop it limply. Another couple who saw him from 7:30 to 8 p.m., during which time the streetlights had come on, recounted that they did not see him move during the half an hour in which he was in view, although they did have the impression that his position had changed. Although they commented between themselves that it was odd that he was not reacting to the mosquitoes, they thought it more likely that he was drunk or asleep and thus did not investigate further. One of the witnesses told the police she observed a man looking down at the sleeping man from the top of the steps that led to the beach. Witnesses said the body was in the same position when the police viewed it. Another witness came forward in 1959, so more than 10 years later, and reported to the police that he and 3 others had seen a well-dressed man carrying another man on his shoulders along Somerton Park Beach the night before the body was found. A police report was made by Detective Don O'Doherty. Wow, that's a curious detail there. So, a witness came... So, again, there's no internet, so I guess things travel a little bit more slowly. I mean, even TVs probably are not... they're not in every single household in the 40s and the early 50s. So, yeah, I mean... But still, I mean, if they were local or were they not local? Like, why, if the witness lived locally, why would they wait 10 years to come forward with this? That's weird. According to the pathologist John Burton Cleland, the man was of Britisher appearance and thought to be aged between 40 and 45. He was in, quote, top physical condition, end quote. So what does that mean? His fitness level was high? I mean, again, does that point to spy? He was 5'11", gray eyes, fair to ginger colored hair, slightly gray around the temples, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, hands and nails that showed no signs of manual labor, big and little toes that met in a wedge shape like those of a dancer or someone who wore boots with pointed toes, and pronounced high calf muscles consistent with people who regularly wore boots or shoes with high heels or performed ballet. He was dressed in a white shirt, a red, white, and blue tie, brown trousers, socks and shoes, a brown knitted pullover, and fashionable gray and brown double-breasted jacket of reportedly American tailoring. All labels on his clothes had been removed. What? How often is someone who's found dead, do they have all the labels on their clothes removed? That's curious. He had no hat, which is noted here, which is pretty unusual in 1948, because all men wore hats in 1948, or wallet. He was clean-shaven and carried no ID, which led police to believe he had committed suicide. Finally, his dental records were not able to be matched to any known person. An autopsy was conducted, and the pathologist estimated the time of death around 2 a.m. on December 1st. See, that's curious, because if they saw people carrying this guy on November 30th, on the night of, curious. Let's look a little deeper into this report before we continue here, because I am curious on why this was mentioned in The Unknown Man by Gerald Michael Feltus in the 2010 book, The Unknown Man. I actually can't find too much information here regarding this other witness, but we will get into that because of the 1958 inquest and the findings of that inquest after I finish the rundown here. So, the autopsy that was conducted, the pathologist estimated time of death around 2 a.m. December 1st. The heart was of normal size and normal in every way. Small vessels not commonly observed in the brain were easily discernible with congestion. There was congestion of the pharynx, and the gullet was covered with whitening of superficial layers of mucosa with a patch of ulceration in the middle of it. The stomach was deeply congested. There was congestion in the second half of the duodenum. There was blood mixed with the food in the stomach. Both kidneys were congested, and the liver contained a great excess of blood in its vessels. The spleen was strikingly large, about 3 times normal size. There was destruction of the center of the liver lobules revealed under the microscope, acute gastritis, hemorrhage, extensive congestion of the liver and spleen, and the congestion to the brain. What? The autopsy also showed that the man's last meal was a pasty eaten about 3 to 4 hours before death, but tests failed to reveal any foreign substance in the body. The pathologist, Dr. Dwyer, concluded, quote, "I am quite convinced the death could not have been natural. The poison I suggested was a barbiturate or a soluble hypnotic," end quote. Although poisoning remained a prime suspicion, the pasty was not believed to be the source. Other than that, the coroner was unable to reach a conclusion as to the man's identity, cause of death, or whether the man seen alive at Somerton Beach on the evening of November 30th was the same man, as nobody had seen his face at the time. Wow, okay. Alright, that's another good point. But if he was in the exact same position and location as where he was found, I mean, I don't know. The body was then embalmed on December 10th, 1948, after the police were unable to get a positive identification. The police said this was the first time they knew that such action was needed. The discovery of the suitcase. January 14th, 1949, staff at the Adelaide railway station discovered a brown suitcase with its label removed. Are we noticing a pattern here of label removing? Which had been checked into the station cloakroom after 11 a.m. on November 30th, 1948. It was believed that the suitcase was owned by the man found on the beach. In the case were a red checked dressing gown, a size 7 red felt pair of slippers, 4 pairs of underpants, pajamas, shaving items, a light brown pair of trousers with sand in the cuffs, an electrician's screwdriver, a table knife cut down into a short, sharp instrument, a pair of scissors with sharpened points, a small square of zinc thought to have been used as a protective sheath for the knife and scissors, and a stenciling brush as used by third officers on merchant ships for stenciling cargo. Also in the suitcase was a thread card of Barbour brand orange waxed thread of an unusual type not available in Australia. It was the same as that used to repair the lining in a pocket of the trousers the dead man was wearing. All ID marks on the clothes had been removed, but police found the name T. Keane. So, the initial T, and then Keane, Keane, on a tie. Keane was also on a laundry bag, and Keane, without the E, was on a singlet, along with 3 dry cleaning marks. 1171/7, 4393/7, and 3053/7. Police believed that whomever removed the clothing tags either overlooked these 3 items or purposely left the Keane tags on the clothes, knowing Keane was not the dead man's name. With wartime rationing still enforced, clothing was difficult to acquire at that time. Although it was a very common practice to use name tags, it was also common when buying secondhand clothing to remove the tags of the previous owners. What was unusual was that there were no spare socks found in the case, and no correspondence, although the police found pencils and unused letter stationery. A search concluded that there was no T. Keane missing in any English-speaking country. A nationwide circulation of the dry cleaning marks also proved fruitless. All that could be garnered from the suitcase was the front gusset and feather stitching on a coat found in the case indicated it had been manufactured in the United States. The coat had not been imported, indicated that the man had been to the U.S. or bought the coat from someone of similar size who had been. Police checked incoming train records and believed the man had arrived in Adelaide railway station by overnight train from either Melbourne, Sydney, or Port Augusta. They speculated he had showered and shaved at the adjacent city baths, where there was no baths ticket on his body. Therefore, before returning to the train station to purchase a ticket for the 10:50 a.m. train to Henley Beach, which, for whatever reason, he missed or did not catch. He immediately checked his suitcase, and who said he was alone during this time as well, because, we don't know that either at that time in the morning. He immediately checked his suitcase at the station cloakroom before leaving the station and catching a city bus to Glenelg. Although named City Baths, the center was not a public bathing facility, but rather a public swimming pool. The railway station bathing facilities were adjacent to the station cloakroom, which itself was adjacent to the station's southern exit into North Terrace. The city baths on King William Street were accessed from the station's northern exit via a laneway. There is no record of the station's bathroom facilities being unavailable on the day he arrived, so apparently they were available. So they think that he might have done this, but so nobody identified him at this time? 11:30 a.m. is not that early. There's people walking around, so this was checked into the station cloakroom at 11 a.m. So I'm assuming they must have interviewed all these people. Nobody remembered him. I don't see any information about that here. Inquest. An inquest into the man's death, conducted by coroner Thomas Erskine Cleland, commenced a few days following the discovery of the body, but was adjourned until June 17, 1949. Cleland, as the investigating pathologist, re-examined the body and made a number of discoveries. He noted that the man's shoes were remarkably clean and appeared to have been recently polished, rather than the condition expected of a man who had apparently been wandering around Glenelg all day. And again, if these clothes and suitcase are not his, Or maybe they were his, but they were checked and moved by other parties or another party who wasn't him while he was somewhere else. Obviously we don't have any of this information. He added that this evidence fit in with a theory that the body may have been brought to Somerton Park Beach after the man's death, accounting for the lack of evidence of vomiting and convulsions, which are the two main physiological reactions to poison. All right, so here's my first issue here. These witnesses saw a man lounging in the same exact position. They saw him move his arm, or at least some of them saw him extend his arm, then it fell limply. So who is this particular individual if it's not the Somerton Man? If it's not this guy that died, someone else happened to be in the exact same spot, and they were never able to track this guy down, interview. I mean, nobody knows anything about this other guy. Now, they didn't see his face, that's fine, but nobody came forward to say, I mean, if it was some kind of transient or bum or whatever, or drunkard who might have not even remembered being there, I mean, I guess that could explain it. But if this man who's in the same spot where the Somerton Man is found dead, if this other man, if it's not him, this man was never identified, or were witnesses mistaken when they said they saw him extend his arm? I mean, these are all interesting questions, and also change positions. Cleland speculated that as none of the witnesses could positively identify the man they saw the previous night as the same person discovered the next morning, there remained the possibility that the man had died elsewhere and had been dumped. He stressed that this was pure... Is this a popular spot to lounge, though? Because, I mean, if a lot of people lounge in that exact spot all the time, then that's fine. It totally could be a different guy. But if you just go there night after night after night and there's nobody ever lounging in that exact same spot, and then one night there happens to be, and the next morning there's a dead body in the same exact position, I mean, that's kind of hard to write it off. He stressed that this was purely speculation, as all the witnesses believed it was definitely the same person, as the body was in the same place and lying in the same distinctive position. He also found no evidence indicating the identity of the deceased. Cedric Stanton Hicks, professor of physiology and pharmacology at the University of Adelaide, testified that a group of drugs, variants of a drug in that group he called number 1 and in particular number 2, were extremely toxic in a relatively small oral dose that would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to identify, even if it had been suspected in the first place. He gave Cleland a piece of paper with the names of the two drugs, which was entered as Exhibit C.18. The names were not released to the public until the 80s, as at the time they were quite easily procurable by the ordinary individual from a chemist without the need to give a reason for the purchase. The drugs were later publicly identified as digitalis and uabane, both cardinaloid-type cardiac glycosides. Hicks noted that the only fact not found in relation to the body was evidence of vomiting. He then stated its absence was not unknown, but that he could not make a frank conclusion without it. Hicks stated that if death had occurred several hours after the man was last seen to move, it would imply a massive dose that could still have been undetectable. It was noted that the movement seen by witnesses at 7 p.m. could have been the last convulsion preceding death. Early in the inquiry, Cleland stated, "I would be prepared to find that he died from poison, that the poison was probably a glucoside, and that it was not accidentally administered, but I cannot say whether it was administered by the deceased himself or some other person." Despite these findings, he could not determine the cause of death of the unidentified man. Cleland remarked that if the body had been carried to its final resting place, then all the difficulties would disappear. After the inquest, a plaster cast was made of the man's head and shoulders. The lack of success in determining the identity and cause of death of the man had led authorities to call it an unparalleled mystery and believe that the cause of death might never be known. So this was back then. Connection to Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Around the same time as the inquest, a tiny piece of rolled up paper with the words Tamum Shud printed on it was found in a fob pocket soon within the dead man's trouser pocket. Public library officials called in to translate the text identified it as a phrase meaning ended or finished, found it on the last page of Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The paper's verso side was blank. Police conducted an Australia-wide search to find a copy of the book that had a similarly blank verso. A photograph of the scrap of paper was released to the press. I mean, they really did some work in this case. I mean, you can't say they were that lazy. I mean, a scrap of paper that could be anything. I mean, they're actually going through all this trouble to identify all this. Following a public appeal by police, the copy of Rubaiyat from which the page had been torn was located. A man showed police a 1941 edition of Edward Fitzgerald's 1859 translation of Rubaiyat, published by Whitcomb and Toombs in Christchurch, New Zealand. Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean, who led the investigation, often protected the privacy of witness in public statements by using pseudonyms. Lean referred to the man who found the book by the pseudonym Ronald Francis, and he has never been officially identified. Francis had not considered that the book might be connected to the case until he had seen an article in the previous day's newspaper. There is some uncertainty about the circumstances under which the book was found. See, this is a problem. I mean, if it's that open and shut, why is it so difficult to track down how this book was brought to the police? One newspaper article refers to the book being found about a week or two before the body was found. Former South Australian police detective Gary Feltus, who dealt with the matter as a cold case, reports that the book was found just after that man was found on the beach at Somerton. The timing is significant, as the man is presumed, based on the suitcase, to have arrived in Adelaide the day before he was found on the beach. Did they ever dust this suitcase for fingerprints? I mean, do they know with 100% certainty that the suitcase belongs to him? Because I would like to know that information. If the book was found 1 or 2 weeks before, it suggests that the man had visited previously or had been in Adelaide for a longer period of time. Not necessarily. Depending if there's another party involved and they showed him the book, or he ripped it from their book and they were there longer. Most accounts state that the book was found in an unlocked car parked in Jetty Road, Glenelg, either in the rear floor well or on the back seat. What? And why is there no more information about this unlocked car? So there's another note here on the wiki. A bus conductor named Leslie Francis Whitkin handed in a copy of the Rubaiyat to the Metropolitan Tramways Trust at around the time. It is not clear whether this was the same copy of the Rubaiyat or an extraneous find, and or if Whitkin was Francis. Well, I mean, Francis is Francis. I mean, that pseudonym, he's including the name. I mean, what are the chances? So if a bus conductor found this book, I mean, that's less suspicious, because a bus conductor would be finding all sorts of different kinds of books. So if the book was just left there on a bus, and he just turned it in because he didn't know who left it, I mean, that's pretty innocent. But why would they hold those details back? That's weird. If that's not official. But these other accounts state that the book was found in an unlocked car. So how many copies of this book are there? Because, again, it does not specify. I mean, I've never heard of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Is this like the most popular book ever in Adelaide and South Australia? That's why there's copies all over the place? Because if this is a super rare book, I mean, this is weird. If this is some kind of spy involvement and they were particularly using that book because it's not a popular book, and there's some kind of code connected to the book, so if there's more than one spy meeting each other, there could be more than one book. Even if it's a rare book. Interesting. Very, very interesting to keep that in mind. The theme of Rubaiyat is that one should live life to the fullest and have no regret when it ends. Another point to the people that say it's definitely suicide, wouldn't spies who, if caught dead, they would want it to look like a suicide as to not cast suspicion, so wouldn't they want to pick a book that talks about living life to the fullest and all that, or whatever, things that possibly could be tied to a suicide? Because a lot of people point to that as it's definitely not a spy thing, because why would it be this? But if the spies want to make deaths look like suicides of unidentified people, if they've gone through great lengths to keep identities secret, wouldn't they pick books for communication that could suggest that? I mean, obviously they would. if that's what they're trying to do. Obviously, I'm not alleging they are or are not trying to do that, or that there are even spies involved. This is, of course, Mindshock. I am not alleging anything is true or untrue. I have to state that many times. A lot of people don't understand that. We're just going over different theories. The poem's subject led police to theorize that the man had committed suicide by poison, although no other evidence corroborated the theory. And if this was the case by the spies, they accomplished it, because the police are already thinking suicide. The book was missing the words Tamum Shud on the last page, which had a blank reverse, and microscopic tests indicated the piece of paper was from the page torn from the book. Also, in the back of the book were faint indentations representing 5 lines of text in capital letters. The second line had been struck out, a fact considered significant due to its similarity to the 4th line and the possibility that it represents an error in encryption. Also, if someone is tearing out the end or it is finished, does that mean it's not finished? Is that the clue? I mean, again, I don't know. So the code here, the handwriting found in the back of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, the text is presumed to be some sort of code. WRGOABABD, and then struck through as MLIAOI. Then we have WTBIMPANETP. Then, I don't know if this is an X struck through or just something to separate from the next lines. MLIABOAIAQC. ITTMTSAMSTGAB. In the book, it is unclear whether the first line begins with an M or a W. Yeah, you can see that scrawl there. It is very difficult. But it is widely believed to be the letter W, owing to the distinctive difference when compared to the stricken letter M. Yeah, it looks... yeah. Unless there was an error in copying the code and a mistake back and forth, unknown which was mistaken first, and then they tried to correct it. There appears to be a deleted or underlined line of text that reads MLIAOI. Although the last character in this line of text looks like an L, it is fairly clear on closer inspection of the image that it is formed from an I, and that the extension of the line is used to delete or underline that line of text. Yep, that's what it does look like. Also, the other L has a curve to the bottom part of the character. There is also an X above the last O in the code, and it is not known if it is significant to the code or not. Initially, the letters were thought to be words in a foreign language before it was realized it was a code. Code experts were called in at the time to decipher the lines, but were unsuccessful. In 1978, following a request from ABC Television's journalist Stuart Littlemore, Department of Defense cryptographers analyzed the handwritten text. The cryptographers reported that it would be impossible to provide a satisfactory answer if the text were an encrypted message. Its brevity meant that it had insufficient symbols from which a clear meaning could be extracted, and the text could be the meaningless product of a disturbed mind. Does that sound like they're covering up for something? Because if this is some kind of spy possibly connected to the U.S., obviously the Department of Defense, they might have been privy to that info, so then they were told to make up that story. Okay. Enter Jessica Thompson. A telephone number was found in the back of the book, belonging to a nurse named Jessica Ellen Jo Thompson. Born 1921, died 2007. Born Jessie Harkness, in the Sydney suburb of Marrickville, New South Wales, who lived in Mossley Street, Glenelg, about 1,300 feet north of the location where the body was found. When she was interviewed by police, Thompson said she did not know the dead man or why he would have her phone number and choose to visit her suburb on the night of his death. However, she also reported that at some time in late 1948, an unidentified man had attempted to visit her and asked the next-door neighbor about her. What? In his book on the case, Gary Feltus stated that when he interviewed Thompson in 2002, he found that she was either being evasive or she just did not wish to talk about it. Feltus believed that Thompson knew the Somerton man's identity. Thompson's daughter, Kate, in a television interview in 2014 with Channel 9's 60 Minutes, also said that she believed her mother knew the dead man. So again, this isn't just a hunch by an investigator. This is corroborated by the woman's daughter. What? I mean, the plot thickens here. I mean, this is totally like a spy novel. In 1949, Jessica Thompson requested that the police not keep a permanent record of her name or release her details to third parties, as it would be embarrassing and harmful to her reputation to be linked to such a case. The police agreed, a decision that hampered later investigations. In news media, books, and other discussions of the case, Thompson was frequently referred to by various pseudonyms, including the nickname Jestyn, Jestyn, and names such as Teresa Johnson née Powell. Feltus in 2010 claimed he was given permission by Thompson's family to disclose her name and that of her husband, Prosper Thompson. Wow, how rare of a name is Prosper? First name Prosper. Nevertheless, the names Feltus used in his book were pseudonyms. Feltus also stated that her family did not know of her connection with the case, and he agreed not to disclose her identity or anything that might reveal it. Thompson's real name was considered important because it may be the description key for the purported code. I mean, what is everybody thinking at this juncture if you're new to the case? Is it that this might have been some kind of rejected or scorned lover situation, or are people thinking that she might have killed the guy? Or poisoned the guy herself? Or there is some kind of spy situation and she was a spy or connected to a spy. When she was later shown the plaster cast of the dead man by D.S. Lean, Thompson said she could not identify the person depicted. According to Lean, he described her reaction upon seeing the cast as, quote, completely taken aback to the point of giving the appearance that she was about to faint, end quote. So does that sound like somebody who doesn't know the guy? But it does sound, if that's the appearance, and it seems like she was not the one who killed him, because why would she be surprised that he's dead? So this is somebody that she knew and possibly either committed suicide. Maybe she was hoping that he wouldn't have committed suicide if this is some kind of rejected, scorned lover situation, or something else, but she clearly might not have known that a guy that she knew was dead. Perhaps, she was shown, yeah, it's tough. In an interview many years later, Paul Lawson, the technician who made the cast, was present when Thompson viewed it. Noted that after looking at the bust, she immediately looked away and would not look at it again. Now keep in mind, this is a cast. This is not a dead body at the morgue that someone might not want to just look at. This is a cast. Thompson also said that while she was working at Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney during World War II, she had owned a copy of Rubaiyat. What? Yo, is this really a popular book in Australia? Because again, I've never heard of it. Because if this is not a popular book, this is tough. This is tough. I mean, this is definitely a mind-shocking case here. I mean, we have some coincidence. The coincidence stack is starting to pile high. In 1945, at the Clifton Gardens Hotel in Sydney, she had given it to an Australian Army lieutenant named Alf Boxall. I mean, we got some great names in this case. We got Prosper, we got Alf, who was serving at the time at the water transport section of the Royal Australian Engineers. Thompson told police that after the war ended, she had moved to Melbourne and married. She said that she had received a letter from Boxall and had replied telling him that she was now married. Subsequent research suggests that her future husband, Prosper Thompson, was in the process of obtaining a divorce from his first wife in 1949, and that he did not marry Jessica until mid-1950. Interesting, so she was lying. There's no evidence that Boxall had any contact with Jessica Thompson after 1945. As a result of their conversations with Thompson, police suspected that Boxall was the dead man. However, in July 1949, Boxall was found in Sydney, and the final page of his copy of Rubaiyat, reportedly a 1924 edition published in Sydney, was intact, with the words Tamum Shud still in place. Boxall was now working in the maintenance section at the Randwick Bus Depot, where he had worked before the war, and was unaware of any link between the dead man and himself. In the front of the copy of Rubaiyat that was given to Boxall, Jessica Harkness had signed herself Jestyn, Jestyn, and written out verse 70. Indeed, indeed, repentance oft before. I swore, but was I sober when I swore? And then came spring and rose in hand, my threadbare penitence a pieces tore. Media reaction. The two Adelaide newspapers, the Advertiser and the News, covered the death in separate ways. The Advertiser first mentioned the case in a small article on page 3 of its morning edition of December 2nd, 1948, titled Body Found on the Beach. It read, a body believed to be of E.C. Johnson, about 45, of Arthur Street, Payneham, was found on Somerton Beach opposite the crippled children's home yesterday morning. The discovery was made by Mr. J. Lyons of White Road, Somerton. Detective H. Strangeway and Constable J. Moss are inquiring. It's an interesting last name, Strangeway. The News featured their story on its first page, giving more details of the dead man. As one journalist wrote in June 1949, alluding to the line in the Rubaiyat, the Somerton Man seems to have made certain that the glass would be empty, save for speculation. An editorial called the case one of Australia's most profound mysteries, and noted that if he died by poison so rare and obscure it could not be identified by toxicology experts, then surely the culprit's advanced knowledge of toxic substances pointed to something more serious than a mere domestic poisoning. I mean, there's connections to the war here, too, so this, a potential spy theory is not as outlandish as some coincidence theorists clinging desperately to appeal to incredulity logical fallacies might persist. Because if this nurse is connected to at least one guy, one soldier involved in the war, I mean, who knows what connections he might have had. Spy theories. There has been persistent speculation that the dead man was a spy due to the circumstances and historical context of his death. At least two sites relatively close to Adelaide were of interest to spies. The Radium Hill uranium mine and the Woomera test range, an Anglo-Australian military research facility. The man's death also coincided with a reorganization of Australian security agencies, which would culminate the following year with the founding of the Australian Security Agency, the Australian Security Intelligence Organization, the ASIO. This would be followed by a crackdown on Soviet espionage in Australia, which was revealed by intercepts of Soviet communications under the Venona Project. Okay, alright, we're getting more into Mindshock land. I actually wasn't even aware of, like, deep Soviet activity in Australia. I mean, I'm sure there was some, but I mean, how extensive were Soviet operations in Australia? The Venona Project was a U.S. counterintelligence program initiated during World War II by the U.S. Army's Signal Intelligence Service, later absorbed by the National Security Agency, which ran from February 1st, 1943 until October 1st, 1980. It was intended to decrypt messages transmitted by the intelligence agencies of the Soviet Union, the NKVD and the KGB and the GRU. Initiated when the Soviet Union was an ally of the U.S., the program continued during the Cold War when it was considered an enemy. During the 37-year duration of the Venona Project, the Signal Intelligence Service decrypted and translated approximately 3,000 messages. The signals intelligence yield included discovery of the Cambridge 5 espionage ring in the UK, the Soviet espionage of the Manhattan Project in the US, known as Project Enormous. Some of the espionage was undertaken to support the Soviet atomic bomb project. The Venona Project remained secret for more than 15 years after it concluded. Some of the decoded Soviet messages were not classified and published by the US until 1995. So that was just some background on the Venona Project. Another theory concerns Boxall, who reportedly was involved in intelligence work during and immediately after World War II. In a 1978 television interview, Stuart Littlemore asks, Mr. Boxall, you had been working, hadn't you, in an intelligence unit before you met this young woman, Jessica Harkness, which, by the way, why did she change her name? And Harkness, I mean, that's an interesting last name as well. Did you talk to her about that at all? In reply, Boxall says, no. When asked if Harkness could have known, Boxall's replied, not unless somebody else told her. And if she was a spy, also, obviously, you would expect him to say those things. When Littlemore suggests in an interview that there may have been an espionage connection to the dead man in Adelaide, Boxall replies, quote, it's quite a melodramatic thesis, isn't it? End quote. You know, see, that's the thing that makes it seem even more likely, because how would he know either way? Because he's involved in intelligence, whether he is or he isn't. How would he know every single spy in existence? I mean, to call it melodramatic without knowing the information on a guy who hasn't been identified. I mean, if he wasn't a spy, you would think he'd be easily identified. Boxall's Army service records suggest that he served initially in the 4th Water Transport Company before being seconded in the North Australia Observer Unit, the NAOU, a special ops unit. And during that time with NAOU, Boxall rose rapidly in rank, being promoted from Lance Corporal to lieutenant within 3 months. And again, I am not familiar with these ranks in Australia. How quickly is that normally done? I mean, does that normally take years and he did it in 3 months? I mean, normally something like that would raise red flags as if he had some kind of clearances sped up, depending on what kind of ops he was involved in. Post-inquest. In 1949, the body of the unknown man was buried in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery, where the Salvation Army conducted the service. The South Australian Grandstand Bookmakers Association paid for the service to save the man from a pauper's burial. Years after the burial, flowers began appearing on the grave. Police questioned a woman leaving the cemetery, but she claimed she knew nothing of the man. It'd be interesting what this woman looked like. Was it not this nurse, Harkness? Was it someone completely different? And this is actually not connected to Harkness, or is there some kind of love triangle where there's 2 women and this dead guy? With or without spy involvement, let's not fall for false dichotomies. If this is a spy circle, I mean, who says spies can't be romantically involved? I mean, come on. There could be a love triangle among spies, or even a love rectangle. About the same time, Ina Harvey, the receptionist from the Strathmore Hotel opposite the Adelaide railway station, revealed that the strange man had stayed in room 21 or 23 for a few days around the time of his death, checking out on November 30th, 1948. Finally, something. So this was months later. Wow, okay. You would think, we really don't know how many people police actually question. She recalled that he was English speaking and only carrying a small black case, not unlike one a musician or doctor might carry. Wait, so this is not the case? When an employee looked inside the case, he told Harvey he had found an object inside the case he described as looking like a needle. What? Why would an employee even look inside the case? And so he told Harvey, this receptionist, that he had a needle. Oh, man. Is everybody keeping up with all this? I mean, and is this small black case this is not the suitcase. So what do we make of that? On November 22nd, 1959, it was reported that one E.B. Collins, an inmate of New Zealand's Wanganui prison, claimed to know the identity of the dead man. And why is there not more information about that? I mean, we're going to come back to that, and we will go over sources. But let's continue in the rundown here. There have been numerous unsuccessful attempts in the 70-plus years its discovery to crack the letters found at the rear of the book, including efforts by military and naval intelligence, mathematicians, and amateur code crackers. In 2004, retired detective Gary Feltus suggested in a Sunday Mail article that the final line, ITTMTSAMSTGAB, could stand for the initials of It's Time to Move to South Australia, Mosley Street. Jessica Thompson lived in Mosley Street, which is the main road through Glenelg. Huh. I mean, in 2014, analysis by computational linguist John Relling strongly supports the theory that the letters consist of the initials of some English texts, but finds no match for these in a large survey of literature, and concludes the letters were likely written as a form of shorthand and not a code. And the original text can likely never be determined. In 1978, ABC TV, in its documentary series Inside Story, produced a program on the Tamum Shud case entitled The Somerton Beach Mystery, where reporter Stuart Littlemore investigated the case, including interviewing Boxall, who could add no new information, and Paul Lawson, who made the plaster cast of the body and who refused to answer a question about whether anyone had positively identified the body. What? What?
I think the biggest technical problem was the fact that he was thawing out, because he was, apart from being embalmed, he was defrozen. And this made the skin sweat just as if a person was working hard in hot conditions.
Did you come to any conclusions of your own about him?
Well, yes, the body, very robust, very strong, and a beautiful shape, a real wedge shape. Broad shoulders, down to narrow hips, well-formed legs. Obviously a man of considerable strength. But strangely enough, or strange in my opinion, there were no body scars and no signs of hard work.
Even with, I mean, he's got very big shoulders. He's not an enormously big man, but that's a big shoulder, isn't it?
That's right.
What were his hands like? Had he been a manual worker?
I don't think so. The hands didn't show any signs of calluses, which you'd expect from handling heavy tools. They seem to be quite smooth.
Once you'd made the cast, your job was sort of over. What happened to it then?
It was taken around to the coroner's court and viewed there by the various people, part of the coroner's inquiry. And afterwards it was brought back here to the museum, and we have had quite a number of people visit the museum to look at the thing, to see if they could recognise the original body from the bust cast.
Any of them stand out in your memory?
Oh, I would say just ordinary people, ordinary couples, ordinary man on the street, if such a person exists.
But what did they say to you?
They didn't say anything to me. It was directed to the cast, between themselves or to the police. I was only showing them the object.
Did you get the feeling that any of them really did know him?
I don't know.
Well, that seems to suggest to me, you're a very cagey man, Mr. Wilson. It seems to suggest to me that maybe somebody did know him.
I wouldn't know.
Did any of them think they knew him?
I don't know. By the way, you're on tender ground.
Well, explain
Part of
that.
the voice.
Well, don't worry about that.
No, I'm not going on with that.
Why not? I mean, what you suggest to me is that there's somebody who obviously did know him.
No, I'm suggesting that the people that came eliminated features and then decided they didn't know him.
But not everyone.
It's possible. I don't know.
You must have been there on some occasion where somebody really believed they knew him.
It's quite possible they weren't sure in their own mind.
So in a sense, some of your customers were more satisfied than others.
Could be.
You're not going to tell me?
Nope.
Wow, so what do we make of that? He's definitely being cagey. I mean, the weird smiles, the refusal to give direct answers. I mean, is it possible he's kind of talking about Harkness and that she knew him, even though he's asking him questions about other people? Obviously, that's relevant, that he wasn't positively ID'd necessarily by someone saying it, but by the actions and reactions. Is that what this is all about? But let's continue on here. In 1994, John Harbour Phillips, Chief Justice of Victoria and Chairman of the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine, reviewed the case to determine the cause of death and concluded that, quote, there seems little doubt it was digitalis, end quote. Phillips supported his conclusion by pointing out that his organs were engorged, consistent with digitalis, the lack of evidence of natural disease, and the absence of anything seen macroscopically which could account for his death. Former South Australian Chief Superintendent Len Brown, who worked the case in the 40s, said that he believed that the man was from a country in the Warsaw Pact, which led to the police's inability to confirm the man's identity. The South Australian Police Historical Society holds the plaster bust which contains strands of the man's hair. Any further attempts to identify the body have been hampered by embalming formaldehyde having destroyed much of the man's DNA. Other key evidence no longer exists, such as the brown suitcase which was destroyed in 1986. In addition, witness statements have disappeared from the police file over the years. Does anybody find that suspicious? I mean, is this just poor evidence management? Or does this have a spy component in people who do not want this case solved? Abbott investigation. In March 2009, a University of Adelaide team led by Professor Derek Abbott began an attempt to solve the case through cracking the code and proposing to exhume the body to test for DNA. His investigations have led to questions concerning the assumptions police had made on the case. Abbott also tracked down the Barber waxed cotton of the period and found packaging variations. This may provide clues to the country where it was purchased. Decryption of the code was being started from scratch. It had been determined that the letter frequency was considerably different from letters written down randomly. The frequency was to be further tested to determine if the alcohol level of the writer could alter random distribution. That's an interesting experiment. The format of the code also appeared to follow the quatrain format of Rubaiyat, supporting the theory that the code was a one-time pad encryption algorithm. Copies of Rubaiyat, as well as the Talmud and the Bible, were being compared to the code using computers to get a statistical base for letter frequencies. However, the code's short length meant that the investigators would require the exact edition of the book used. With the original copy lost in the 1950s, researchers have been looking for a Fitzgerald edition. Okay, why is everything lost in this case? This is kind of weird. I mean, a book doesn't take that much space. An investigation had shown that the Somerton Man's autopsy reports of 1948 and 1949 are now missing. Okay, all right. I mean, the coincidence stack of like some kind of cover up here. I mean, this is weird. I mean, this case got a lot of attention. It's not like this is some obscure case that was never covered or investigated. That could theoretically make sense why everything would be just missing. But the Barr Smith Library's collection of Cleland's notes do not contain anything on the case. Masij Hennerberg, professor of anatomy at the University of Adelaide, examined images of the Somerton Man's ears and found that his Simba, upper ear hollow, is larger than his cavum, lower ear hollow, a feature possessed by only 1 to 2% of the Caucasian population. That's an interesting thing, yeah. In May 2009, Abbott consulted with dental experts who concluded that the Somerton Man had hypodontia, a rare genetic disorder of both lateral incisors, a feature present in only 2% of the general population. Okay, wow, so we have 1 to 2% ear feature and only 2% dental feature here. So that should narrow it down quite a bit. In June 2010, Abbott obtained a photograph of Jessica Thompson's eldest son, Robin, which clearly showed that he, like the unknown man, had not only a larger Simba than cavum, but also hypodontia. Okay, what are the chances there? The chance that this is a coincidence has been estimated as 1 in 10 million and 1 in 20 million individually. So what does that make the chance of both happening at the same time? I mean, that's exponential. The media have suggested that Robin Thompson, who was 16 months old in 1948 and died in 2009, may have been a child of either Boxall or the Somerton Man and passed off as Prosper Thompson's son. DNA testing would confirm or eliminate this speculation. Abbott believes an exhumation and an autosomal DNA test could link the Somerton Man to a short list of surnames, who, along with the existing clues to the man's identity, would be the final piece of the puzzle. I mean, this is a proper investigation being conducted here, because the fact that these ear features and dental features occur in 2% or less of the population, and they have 2 of these points, whereas if only one of those things were present, I mean, that might not be enough. But with both, I mean, we got some information here. In July 2013, Abbott released an artistic impression he commissioned of the Somerton Man, believing this might finally lead to an identification. All this time, we've been publishing the autopsy photo, and it's hard to tell what something looks like from that, Abbott said. In December 2017, Abbott announced 3 excellent hairs at the right developmental stage for extracting DNA had been found on the plaster cast of the corpse and had been submitted for analysis to the Australian Centre for Ancient DNA at the University of Adelaide. Processing the results could take up to a year. While much of the DNA is degraded, in February 2018, the University of Adelaide team obtained a high-definition analysis of the mitochondrial DNA from the hair sample from Somerton Man. They found that Somerton Man belonged to haplogroup H4A1A1A, possessed by only 1% of Europeans. However, mitochondrial DNA is only inherited through the maternal line, and therefore cannot be used to investigate a hereditary link between Rachel Egan, Abbott's wife, and Somerton Man. Okay. The 60 Minutes investigation. In November 2013, relatives of Jestin gave interviews to the Channel 9 current affairs program 60 Minutes. Kate Thompson, the daughter of Jessica and Prosper Thompson, said that her mother was the woman interviewed by police and that her mother had told her she had lied to them. So this isn't just a suspicion. This woman is saying her mother told her that she had lied to police. Jessica did know the identity of the Somerton Man, and his identity was also quote, known to a level higher than the police force, end quote. Thompson's father had died in 1995 and mother had died in 2007. She suggested that her mother and the Somerton Man may have both been spies, noting that Jessica Thompson taught English to migrants, was also interested in communism, and could speak Russian, although she would not disclose to her daughter where she had learned it or why. Although technically that doesn't really tell you which side a spy is on, because if she's spying for the West, I mean, knowing Russian would be helpful in being a spy to figure out what the Russians are doing. Robin Thompson's widow, Roma Egan, and their daughter, Rachel Egan, also appeared on 60 Minutes, suggesting that the Somerton Man was Robin's father and therefore Rachel's grandfather. The Egans reported lodging a new application with the Attorney General, John Rao, to have the Somerton Man's body exhumed and DNA tested. Abbott also subsequently wrote to Rao in support of the Egans, saying that exhumation for DNA testing would be consistent with federal government policy of identifying soldiers in war graves to bring closure to their families. Kate Thompson opposed the exhumation as being disrespectful to her brother. The exhumation in October 2011, as interest in the case resurfaced, Attorney General John Rao refused to exhume the body, stating, "There needs to be public interest reasons that go well beyond public curiosity or broad scientific interest." Feltus said he was still contacted by people in Europe who believed the man was a missing relative, but did not believe an exhumation and finding the man's family grouping would provide answers to relatives, as during that period so many war criminals changed their names and came to different countries. October 2019, however, Attorney General Vicky Chapman granted approval for his body to be exhumed to extract DNA for analysis. The parties interested in the analysis agreed to cover the costs. A potential granddaughter's DNA is planned to be compared to the unknown man's to see if it is a match. An exhumation was carried out May 19, 2021. The remains were deeper in the ground than previously thought. It was reported that the body was exhumed as part of Operation Persevere and Operation Persist, which are investigating historical unidentified remains in South Australia. The authorities have said that they intend to take DNA from the remains if possible. Dr. Anne Coxon of the Forensic Science South Australia said, "The technology available to us now is clearly light years ahead of where the techniques were available when this body was discovered in the late 40s, and that the tests would use every method at our disposal to try and bring closure to the enduring mysteries." Okay, so nothing yet in terms of, this was last year. What's going on? What's going on here? The thing is, if his identity was known to forces higher than the police force, levels higher, like intelligence agencies, Was he a spy that was found out? So was he a Soviet spy, and people found out about it and killed him, and this woman who had an affair with a Soviet spy, and is she a Soviet spy herself? Or is she an Australian spy? And was he an Australian spy as well, who was possibly a double agent working for the Soviets? Or compromised in some way, or vice versa? I mean, there's clearly a lot of reasons why she would not disclose that she knew this guy to the police, regardless of which side she was on. Reported identifications. A number of possible identifications have been proposed over the years. The advertiser, on reporting the discovery of the body, gave the possible ID as E.C. Johnson, about 45, of Arthur Street, Payneham. The following day, December 3rd, 1948, Johnson identified himself at a police station. The same day, the News published a photograph of the dead man on its front page. Wait, so why did they identify him as this guy who was clearly alive? What? Okay, leading to additional calls from members of the public about his possible identity. By December 4th, police had announced that the man's fingerprints were not on the South Australian police records, forcing them to look further afield. On December 5th, the advertiser reported that police were searching through military records after a man claimed to have had a drink with a person resembling the dead man at a hotel in Glenelg on November 13th. During their drinking session, the mysterious man supposedly produced a military pension card bearing the name Solomonson. In early January 49, two people identified the body as that of 63-year-old former woodcutter Robert Walsh. A third person, James Mack, also viewed the body, initially could not identify it, but an hour later he contacted police to claim it as Walsh. Okay, that's kind of curious. Mack stated that the reason he did not confirm this at the viewing was a difference in the color of the hair. Walsh had left Adelaide several months earlier to buy sheep in Queensland, but failed to return at Christmas as planned. Police were skeptical, believing Walsh to be too old to be the dead man. However, the police did state that the body was consistent with that of a man who had been a woodcutter, although the state of the man's hands indicated he had not cut wood for at least 18 months. Any thoughts that a positive ID had been made were quashed. However, when Elizabeth Thompson, one of the people who had earlier positively identified the body as Walsh, retracted her statement after a second viewing of the body, where the absence of a particular scar on the body, as well as the size of the dead man's legs, led her to realize the body was not Walsh. Now, was Walsh eventually found, or was he just a missing person that was never found? Okay, unknown here. By early February 49, there had been 8 different positive IDs of the body, including 2 Darwin men who thought that the body was a friend of theirs, and others who thought it was a missing station worker, a worker on a steamship, or a Swedish man. Detectives from Victoria initially believed the man was there because of the similarity of the laundry marks to those used by several dry cleaning firms in Melbourne. Following publication of the man's photograph in Victoria, 28 people claimed to know his identity. Victoria detectives disproved all of the claims and said that other investigations indicated it was unlikely that he was from Victoria. A seaman named Tommy Reed from the SS Cycle in port at the time was thought to be the dead man, but after some of the shipmates viewed the body at the morgue, they stated categorically that the corpse was not that of Reed. And was Reed another guy who was missing and never found? By November 53, police announced they had recently received the 251st solution to the identity of the body from members of the public who claimed to have met or known him. But they said that the only clue of any value remained the clothing that the man wore. In 2011, an Adelaide woman contacted biological anthropologist Maciej Henneberg about an ID card of an H.C. Reynolds that she had found in her father's possession. The card, a document issued in the U.S. to foreign seamen during World War I, was given to Henneberg in October 2011 for a comparison of the ID photograph to that of the Somerton Man. While Henneberg found anatomical similarities in features such as the nose, lips, and eyes, he believed they were not as reliable as the close similarity of the ear. The ear shapes shared by both men were a very good match, although Henneberg also found what he called a unique identifier, a mole on the cheek that was the same shape and in the same position in both photographs. Together with the similarity of the ear characteristics, the mole, in a forensics case, would allow me to make a rare statement positively identifying the Somerton Man. The ID card numbered 58757 was issued in the U.S. on February 28, 1918, to H.C. Reynolds, giving his nationality as British and age as 18. Searches conducted by the U.S. National Archives, the U.K. National Archives, and the Australian War Memorial Research Centre have failed to find any records relating to H.C. Reynolds. The South Australia Police Major Crime Branch, who still have the case listed as open, will investigate the new information. Some independent researchers believe the ID card belonged to Horace Charles Reynolds, a Tasmanian man who died in 1953 and therefore could not have been the Somerton Man. Now, okay, if he's part of some kind of secret spy operation, would they issue a card not tied to an existing identity? So therefore the card is legitimate, and maybe it's the Somerton Man, but it wouldn't be tied to that identity because the identity is false because this guy's a spy. Okay, so I mean, even if he's identified, so to speak, I mean, how would the DNA definitively identify him if he doesn't have a real identity? So that's kind of an issue. So, I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, that's a really interesting point. Now, let's go further into Mindshock land. So, the story regarding how the book was found in a car is also gone over on allthat'sinteresting.com. To the excitement of police, the last page of the book, the part okay, so the police searched far and wide for a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam that matched the distinctive font from the Tamum Shud paper. They couldn't find it anywhere until a man came to the police station with a copy. To the excitement of the police, the last page of the part containing Tamum Shud had been ripped out, but the man who brought the book in claimed that he knew nothing about the poems or the Somerton Man. In December of the previous year, he reported he had taken a drive with his brother-in-law and parked a few hundred yards away from Somerton Beach. When they returned to the car, his brother-in-law noticed a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam on the floor. Both men had assumed the book belonged to the other. But when the national coverage of the Somerton Man had began to circulate, the two men took a closer look at the book and realized it was the one the police were searching for. Okay, does anybody buy that? I mean, again, if you were writing a movie, would anybody writing a spy novel even, would they buy that, oh yeah, there's a book that's just magically going to be discovered in a car, and two brothers are just going to assume it belongs to the other, or a brother and a brother-in-law are going to assume the book belongs to the other and not ask any questions? Now, there's so many problems here. So there's also the other story of the bus driver who brought forth a copy, but that might have not been the copy with the page torn out. It might have simply been another copy of this Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam book. So maybe that's not suspicious, I don't know. But in this particular case, I mean, what is going on here? So why would somebody throw the book randomly? And so this book appeared in their car the previous year, coincidentally also December. He's stating here, in December of the previous year. They noticed the book when they returned to the car, it was there. I mean, is anybody else have a problem with this? So he drove around for a year with his brother-in-law's book in the car without wanting to give it back to him? Wait. Hold on a second. Let's look at this again. A man came into the police station with a copy. He had taken a drive with his brother-in-law and parked. So it's stating that, is this his car? Because otherwise, wouldn't they say they parked? Or he said he took a drive with his brother-in-law and parked. So not they had taken a drive. It says here that he reported that he had taken a drive and parked. Now, again, I don't know. Perhaps this was the brother-in-law's, but he has the book in his own hand right now. So does that mean So actually, he also stated when they returned to the car, his brother-in-law noticed the copy. And they assumed it belonged to each other, and nobody said a word about it? And that, so they just drove. So it actually doesn't even matter whose car it is. Whoever's car it is, they drove around with the book in the back seat for a year, for more than a year. Or did they take? I mean, it's actually unclear here yet. Did they bring? If he, why would he take his brother-in-law's book into his own house? Right? He would if it was in his car, and vice versa. So was the book simply left in the car for over a year? I mean, what does everybody make of this? Now we're gonna really get into Mindshock land. Because if there were other people associated with the case who ended up dead, would that be suspicious to anybody? And yes, that was just a tease because we're not done going through the timeline. Let me go through the timeline one more time, and then we will go over all of this information that apparently nobody wants to talk about in the mainstream sources. So, okay, so according to the coroner's report, Somerton Man would have been born around 1905. In April 1906, Alfred Boxall is born in London, England. October 16th, 1912, Prosper Thompson is born in central Queensland. February 28th, 1918, the H.C. Reynolds identity card is issued. 1921, Jesse Harkness is born in Marrickville, New South Wales. 1936, Prosper Thompson moves from Blackton, New South Wales to Melbourne, Victoria, marries and lives in Mentone, a southeast Melbourne suburb. And this is his first wife. This is not Jessica Harkness. August 1945, Jessica Harkness gives Alf Boxall an inscribed copy of the Rubaiyat over drinks at the Clifton Gardens Hotel in Sydney prior to his being posted overseas on active service. The inscription is signed capital J-E, lowercase S-T-Y-N, Jestin. Okay, now, so is this a thing she does? She gives gifts of this book to men. Or, if this is part of aspiring, again, then the book would be connected to the codes. Circa October 1946, Jessica Harkness's son, Robin, is conceived, assuming a normal duration pregnancy. Late 1946, Harkness moves to Mentone to temporarily live with her parents. Interesting. The same Melbourne suburb in which Prosper Thompson had established himself and his then new wife 10 years prior. In early 1947, Harkness moves to a suburb of Adelaide, South Australia, and changes her name to Thompson, the name of her future husband. So she changed her name to Thompson before she married her future husband. See, how common is that? Does anybody else find that weird? I don't know. Not to mention Thompson, I mean, without the P, but it's still, I'm assuming, a relatively common name, Thompson without the P. July 1947, Robin Thompson is born. So, let's go through this again. So, August 45... Jessica Harkness gives Alf Boxall the Rubaiyat copy. Okay? Over 1 year later, so the following, not that October, but the October after of 46, this is allegedly where Jessica Harkness would have conceived Robin, approximately, give or take a month or whatever. I mean, do they have his birth date? So then it could have been after, but not earlier. Well, actually, we don't know the exact length of the pregnancy, of course, so actually, yeah, we don't. Okay, late 46, so this would be late 46, so either the end of October, November, December, she moves to Mentone to live with her parents. So she is pregnant here when she moves to the same Melbourne suburb in which Prosper Thompson lives. So then she moves to Adelaide in early 47. So I don't know, this is first quarter, early second quarter, and then Robin Thompson is born in July 1947. So then how would he be Prosper Thompson's son? Unless she was seeing Thompson was unless Thompson was in Merrickville? But her parents, wait, it doesn't say all the places that Harkness lived, but either way, unless Prosper Thompson was visiting her elsewhere she was living while he was living in Menton, then this would not have been able to be his son. January 15th, 1948, Boxall arrives back in Sydney from his last active duty and is discharged from the Army in April 1948. July 1948, Prosper McTaggart Thompson, hired car proprietor of Mossley Street, Glenelg, appears in Adelaide local court as a defendant in a car sale dispute dating from November 1947, establishing Proper Thompson as active in Adelaide from 1947. But keep in mind, October 46 would be approximately when Robin would have been conceived. Interesting. But actually, then again, if he's a defendant in November 47, the conception could have been. So if he was, if it's not a normal pregnancy, give or take a month or two, theoretically, I guess it could be possible that she met Prosper Thompson earlier. Okay. The door is open. November 47 verse. Oh, wait. No, it's not. It's 47, not 46. October 46, because he was born. This is after he's born. So scratch that. Gotta keep up with these dates here. So, yes, not possible unless he was there much earlier than that. Okay. Which there's no evidence of here. November 30th, 1948, 8:30 to a.m. to 10:50 a.m. 8:30 to 10:50 a.m. November 30th, 1948. The Somerton Man is presumed to have arrived in Adelaide by train. That's another curiosity, though, because, you have multiple people. Okay. He buys a ticket for 10:50 a.m. to Henley Beach, but does not use it. This ticket was the first sold of only 3 issued between 6:15 and 2 p.m., 6:15 a.m. and 2 p.m. by this particular ticket clerk for the Henley Beach train. Between 8:30 to 10:50, there is no satisfactory explanation for what the Somerton Man did during those hours. There is no record of the Adelaide Railway Station's bathroom facilities being unavailable, and no ticket in his pocket to suggest he had visited the public baths outside of the station. Between 11 a.m. and 11:15 a.m., checks a brown suitcase into the train station cloak room. After 11:15 a.m., buys a 7D bus ticket on a bus departed at 11:15 a.m. from the south side of North Terrace in front of the Strathmore Hotel, opposite the railway station. He may have boarded at a later time elsewhere in the city, as his bus ticket was the 6th of 9, sold between the railway station and the South Terrace. However, he had only a 15-minute window from the earliest time he could have checked his suitcase. The luggage room was around 60 meters from the bus stop. It is not known which stop he alighted at. The bus terminated at Somerton Park at 11:44 a.m., and inquiries indicated that he must have alighted at Glenelg, a short distance from the St. Leonard's Hotel. This stop is less than 1 kilometer, 3,300 feet north of the Mossley Street address of Jessica Thompson, which was itself 400 meters from where the body was found. Between 7 and 8 p.m., various witness sightings. Between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., estimated time he had eaten the pasty based on the time of death. December 1st, 2 a.m., estimated time of death. The time was estimated by a quick opinion on the state of rigor mortis while the ambulance was in transit. As a suspected suicide, no attempt to determine the correct time was made. As poisons affect the progression of rigor, 2 a.m. is probably inaccurate. Let me read that again. As poisons affect the progression of rigor, 2 a.m. is probably inaccurate, not accurate. 6:30 a.m., found dead by John Lyons and 2 men with a horse. January 14th, 1949, Adelaide railway station finds the brown suitcase belonging to the man. It took him that long? 6th to 14th June, the piece of paper bearing the inscription Tamum Shud is found in a concealed fob pocket. So they don't even know which date. So there's no accurate record stating whether it was between the 6th and the 14th. That's crazy. Okay. Between the 17th and the 21st of June, coroner's inquest. July 22nd, a man hands in the copy of Rubaiyat he said he had found on November 30th, or perhaps a week or two earlier, containing an unlisted phone number and mysterious inscription. Police later matched the Tamum Shud paper to the book. And this, again, there's no solid corroboration because there's two accounts here. One of account is that if this is not this particular copy, the other copy was from the brother who took a ride with his brother-in-law, and it was in the car for over a year and a half at this point. July 26th, the unlisted phone number discovered in the book is traced to a woman living in Glenelg, Jessica Thompson, previously Harkness. Shown the plaster cast by Paul Lawson, she did not identify that the man was Alf Boxall or any other person. Lawson's diary entry for that day names her as Mrs. Thompson and states that she had a nice figure and was very acceptable, referring to the level of attractiveness, which allows the possibility of an affair with the Somerton Man. She was 27 years old in 1948. In a later interview, Lawson describes her behavior as being very odd that day. She appeared as if she was about to faint. Jessica Harkness requested her real name be withheld because she didn't want her husband to know that she knew Alf Boxall, even though she did not identify this man as Alf Boxall. Although she was in fact not married at the time, the name she gave police was Jessica Thompson, with her real name not being discovered until 2002. But so didn't she change her name, though, before she got married? If those records are true, I mean, this is on the wiki breakdown. I believe most of this information is from the University of Adelaide investigation that came later. July 27th, Sydney detectives locate and interview Boxall. Early 1950, Prosper Thompson's divorce is finalized. May 1950, Jessica and Prosper Thompson are married. Sometime during the 1950s, the original Rubaiyat is lost. Make of that what you will. We're about to get into Mindshock land, so that might be even more suspicious than it appears right now. May 18th, 1953, the death of Horace Charles Reynolds, the Tasmanian man born in 1900 and regarded by some investigators as the owner of the H.C. Reynolds ID card. March 14th, 1958, the coroner's inquest is continued. The Thompsons and Alf Boxall are not mentioned. No new findings are recorded, and the inquest is ended with an adjournment sine die. And that is the conclusion of a meeting by a deliberative assembly, such as a legislature or organized board, without setting a day to reconvene. The assembly can reconvene, either in its present form or reconstituted form, if pre-existing laws and rules provide for this. So basically no plans for anything further. That was in March 14th, 1958. 1986, the Somerton Man's brown suitcase and contents are destroyed as no longer required. So they're not lost. They are specifically destroyed with the explanation given, no longer required. 1994, the Chief Justice of Victoria, John Harbour Phillips, studies the evidence and concludes the poisoning was due to digitalis. April 26, 1995, Prosper Thompson dies. August 17, 1995, Boxall dies. May 13, 2007, Jessica Thompson dies. March 2009, Robin Thompson dies. So so he died pretty young because he's dying 2 years after his mother. October 14th, 2019, Attorney General of South Australia grants conditional approval for the Somerton Man to be exhumed in order for a DNA sample to be obtained. May 19th, 2021, exhumation took place. Okay, so let's get crazy. Now, some of these other connections, they actually are listed on Wikipedia here, which we will get into. So it says here, similar or possibly related cases, 1945 to 1949. Joseph George Marshall. In June 1945, 3 years before the death of the Somerton Man, a 34-year-old Singaporean named George Marshall, born Joseph Saul Haim Mashal, was found dead in Ashton Park, Mosman, with an open copy of the Rubaiyat on his chest. Is that not a mind shock? What is it? What is up with this book? Ashton Park is directly adjacent to Clifton Gardens. What? What? Hold on a second. Hold on a second. So right adjacent to where Jessica Harkness gave Alf Boxall a copy of the Rubaiyat, this was at the Clifton Gardens Hotel, August 1945. In June, so this is shortly before, so this is 2 months before Harkness gave Boxall a copy of the Rubaiyat. So a guy is found dead with the Rubaiyat open copy on his chest. 2 months later, in a supposedly unrelated incident, Harkness is giving Boxall a copy of the Rubaiyat right next to where this guy was found dead with this copy of the book on his chest. I mean, what? What? Is everybody following here? Marshall was a brother of David Marshall, who would later become Singapore's first chief minister. So we have a high-ranking international individual here. Killed, or found dead, he was 34 years old. This 34-year-old found dead with a copy of this book, whose brother became the chief minister of Singapore, right adjacent to the hotel where Harkness is giving Boxall a copy of this book. Boxall, who's in the military in some kind of intelligence capacity for special operations of some kind. Harkness, who supposedly can speak Russian based on her daughter. An inquest was held August 15, 1945. Gwyneth Dorothy Graham testified at the inquest and was found dead 13 days later, face down, naked in a bath with her wrist slit. So not only is the brother of the future chief minister of Singapore found dead, but a woman here who testified in his inquest is found dead 13 days later. So there's really not a lot of information on Gwyneth Dorothy Graham. So she was 25 years old. There's an article here. The Argus, Melbourne, Monday, August 27th, 1945. Nude woman found drowned in bath. The nude body of Gwyneth Dorothy Graham, 25, was found in a bath half filled with water in a flat in Rosalind Road, King's Cross, early yesterday morning. Her wrists had been cut and a safety razor was lying at the bottom of the bath. Police were told by a man that he and Miss Graham returned to the flat about 11 p.m. on Saturday. She went to the bathroom, and as he did not hear any movement, he called to her from the bedroom. She did not answer, and when he entered the bathroom, her body was floating face down in the bath. Although the cuts onto the woman's wrists were deep, her death was caused by drowning. Okay, so this man, not named. Does anybody know anything about this man? So he's the last person to have seen her. What is going on here? And there's no mention of her, there is absolutely no mention here of her testifying at the inquest. Alright, so let's get a little deeper here. So, Omar Khayyam of Rubaiyat.wordpress.com has a lot of interesting information here. There's an article here written by Sandra Bill, September 29th, 2017. Why George Marshall's Rubaiyat is not a false imprint. So, On June 3rd, 1945, in Ashton Park in Sydney, Australia, police found the decomposing body of Singapore-born Joseph Solheim Marshall, more commonly known as George and sometimes as Lorenzo. A lot of different names here. I mean, is this how spies operate? Near his left hand was barbituric acid powder, and on his chest was an open copy of the 7th Methuen edition of Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. He had marked the following quatrain: "Ah, make the most of what we yet may spend, before we too into the dust descend. Dust into dust, and under dust to lie. Sans wine, sans song, sans singer, and sans end." His death was ruled a suicide by poisoning. After all, he had attempted suicide twice before and had spent time in an insane asylum, all caused by a head injury age 7. He was a philosopher, a failed poet, and a disciple of Omar Khayyam. Okay, so is there a specific... So that's a direct connection here. His brother said, quote, "I have no doubt that this was the form of death that would appeal to my brother as being the finest and noblest way of terminating his life," end quote. But many believe there's a conspiracy here. There's a strong political connection. His brother, David Marshall, went on to become Singapore's chief minister. 2 months later, his girlfriend unexpectedly committed suicide, allegedly, by cutting her wrists, despite being in a relationship with another man, Helmut Hendon. Okay, so they named him here. So this was his former girlfriend who testified at the inquest. Ashton Park was very close to the Clifton Gardens Hotel, where some years later, Jessica Thompson would give Al Boxall a copy of the Rubaiyat in the infamous Somerton Man Tamum Shud mystery. The mystery itself revolves around a discovered body, Jessica Thompson, now 700 miles away in Adelaide, and another Rubaiyat with an indecipherable code. Marshall and Hendon were both Jewish, and Thompson converted to Judaism despite Judaism being rare in Australia. They all attended or had links to the bohemian club, the Packies, as did Alf Boxall, who received the other Rubaiyat. Finally, the point of this blog post is that there is no record of a 7th Methuen edition of the Rubaiyat ever being published. Many believe that this is a false imprint or even a one-time pad for a secret code not printed by Methuen at all. Internet experts by the dozen, and even the New York Public Library, all state that there are only 5 editions. Unfortunately, Methuen themselves no longer have archival records after a century of mergers and takeovers. So let's set the record straight. In 1900, Methuen issued their first edition using Fitzgerald's 5th translation with additional commentary by Batson and Ross. They reissued it in 1901 as a limited edition of 60. In March 1904, they issued a small edition of Fitzgerald's first translation as part of their Methuen's Miniature Library series. In 1913, they produced a new edition of Fitzgerald's first translation with illustrations by Sullivan. In 1923, they reprinted this, labeling it the second edition. Finally, there was a 1930 edition with an introduction by Rosen. These are the 5 Methuen editions, counting one as a reprint, enumerated by the New York Public Library and others. No great surprises so far. What is less commonly known is that Methuen reissued the March 1904 miniature edition repeatedly, see image, but didn't bother depositing these with copyright libraries. It was only when a 7th edition came into my possession and I saw how small it was, 12 centimeters, that I made the link to the 1904 edition. Until now, most people believe this publishing history was fictional to add credibility to false imprint. However, there is evidence. Messrs. Methuen and Company regularly published advertisements in the back of their books. It is relatively easy to find adverts at archive.org for the miniature library, including all of the Rubaiyat reprints up to the 5th edition, matching the publication history. Unfortunately, Methuen stopped marketing the whole of the miniature library midway through 1920, so no adverts for the 6th or 7th editions exist. I've examined 60 books for the period for adverts which confirm this. Man, this person's doing research. 2 7th editions have been found, but given their tiny size and flimsy nature, it's no surprise many haven't survived. There is no conspiracy. George Marshall was simply an Omar-obsessed, suicidal young man, and Methuen never deposited all their books because there were never really new editions only reprints. Okay, wow. Now, I don't see anywhere stated, so he's concluding that it was a miniature edition, but I don't see that listed anywhere. So, that's still quite unknown. So, is this a deeper conspiracy, and Boxall and Jessica Thompson are part of these bohemian clubs? Wow. That's pretty crazy. So, let's go now to Global History's A Student Journal. This is from Global History's Volume 3, Number 2, October 2017, pages 139 to 157 by Rowan Holmes. Microhistory interrogates a mystery on some possible new relations in the Somerton Man or the Tamum Shud case. So, let's, I'm going to skip to this interesting excerpt here. So, it is uncontested that one of the numbers inscribed in the book proved to be the telephone number of Jessica Ellen Harkness, a nurse who liked to call herself Jestin, who had been born and trained in Sydney and now worked at the home for crippled children in front of which the body had been found. So we have another coincidence here. She worked right across the street from where this guy is found dead. Oh man, this just keeps getting worse and worse. So she worked at the home for crippled children. She lived nearby in Glenelg, and a detective called on her. Jestin denied all knowledge of Somerton Man while readily agreeing that she had once owned a copy of the Rubaiyat. It could not, however, have been the one found in the car, and from which the Tamum Shud slip had supposedly been torn, as she had given her copy to one Alfred Alf Boxall, an army lieutenant in Sydney in 1945. She was now, she said, married to someone else and had no connection with Boxall since. On Tuesday, July 26th, Jestin was taken to view the plaster bust of the Somerton Man. Again, accounts differ significantly as to her reaction. One of the detectives working on the case, Lionel Lean, said that she nearly fainted. Everyone agrees that she denied knowing the man and insisted that whoever it was certainly not Boxall. This was confirmed the next day when police in Sydney located Boxall, very much alive and queuing for his pay envelope in his workplace, a municipal tram depot where he was employed as a mechanic. Boxall told a TV interviewer in 1978 that once the police established that he could not possibly be dead and in Adelaide, they lost interest in him. He was, however, pestered by reporters who accompanied the police, and he showed them Jestin's Rubaiyat, complete with an inscription by her to get rid of them. So he saved this copy. Interesting. Years later. According to Boxall, Jestin was a casual acquaintance who had given him the popular Oriental-themed book as a farewell present over drinks when he was being posted to the Southeast Asia area. She had said, quote, "You're going into palm trees," or words to that effect. "You might as well read about him before you go," and she gave me the book, end quote. In 1949, Boxall told the reporters what he told the police. He knew nothing whatsoever about the Somerton Man and the circumstance of the repeated Rubaiyat he ascribed to an amazing coincidence. So if he thinks that's an amazing coincidence, what does he think of the fact that this guy died inside of 2 months of the handoff of this book with the exact book on his chest, whose brother ended up being a chief minister of Singapore? If he thinks this is an amazing coincidence, what would he think of that if he knew that? I'm sure he did. He must have known that at some point. This is crazy. So an interesting note on Boxall here, he neglected to mention that much of his military service had been with a reconnaissance and commando unit, the 2nd or 1st North Australia Observer Unit, known as the Knackaroos. In fact, his service record shows that he was involved in operations in the Timor Sea during the Timor Campaign of 1942, alongside the Australian author Xavier Herbert, already famous for his 1938 novel Capricornia, partly a denunciation of the treatment of Indigenous Australians in the Northern Territory, and Herbert's brother, David, who commanded Boxall's company. Boxall was working as an instructor in small Navy craft at an Army transport unit in Mossman when he was given the book. He was kept on Army service mostly as a ship's engineer until 1948. Interesting. This is almost the end of the conventional narrative, with Justin reticent, Boxall pleading total ignorance, and the code apparently unsolvable despite many attempts, official and otherwise. Developments in the case died away to be replaced by decades of speculation. Naturally, the case migrated onto the internet, and it is still the subject of attention in the mass media. Recently, in 2013, the Australian current affairs TV program 60 Minutes devoted a segment to an extended interview with Justin's surviving family members, one of whom claims that Justin was a Russian agent who had a child by Somerton Man. The family is divided over calls to exhume the body for DNA testing, although a recent DNA test conducted on the putative son of Somerton Man by Justin, now deceased himself, purported to show that Somerton Man was actually of American origin. Justin, Boxall, and other more minor participants in the case whose stories cannot be told here are all dead now. The case, with all its enigmas, lacunae, and contradictions, seem to belong to microhistory now as firmly as that of Ginsburg's heretical and combusted Miller Minocchio. And yet, the case of Somerton Man may still be capable of yielding new and perhaps useful information. My research into a series of strange deaths which occurred in Sydney in 1945 at the same time that Justin was giving her Rubaiyat copy to Alf Boxall and involving still another copy of the book point towards a possible connection between the two trails of events. As yet, there is nothing definite, but by referring to primary documents such as inquest and Army service records, I have been able to trace out a sequence of events which possibly both deepen the mystery and extend its reach in time and space. However, much of what I have found is open to various interpretations. Ginsburg opens The Cheese and the Worms with an epigraph attributed to the French author Louis Ferdinand Céline. Tout ce qui est intéressant se passe dans l'ombre. On ne sait rien de la véritable histoire de homme, which roughly translates as everything of interest happens in the shadows. Nothing is known of the true history of humanity. Wow, this is going into some mudflood territory. This is perhaps an instance of the conspiratorial thinking which led Céline to destroy his own literary reputation in the late 30s through hysterical, paranoid anti-Semitism, which led inexorably to charges of Nazi collaboration, post-war imprisonment, and abiding disgrace. We should be careful not to follow Céline down a toxic rabbit hole into delirium by attributing more to the scattered, if suggestive, events than the facts themselves permit. What we are about to learn is surely strange and shadowy enough without any attempts to explain it on my part, even if I knew how to do so. Monday, May 7th, 1945, was a momentous day world around, being the day before the surrender of the German armed forces. Anticipatory celebrations were widespread away from the front lines, including in Sydney, the oldest and largest city in Australia. However, one Sydney resident, an old lady called Augusta Packy McDougall, would not live to see news of the surrender the next day. At around 7 p.m. on the wet, windy evening, she was struck by a truck coming from the Army post office, a warehouse in the suburb of Surrey Hills. The truck was passing towards Elizabeth Street alongside Hyde Park in the city's center when it struck Packy as she was crossing the street by way of the tram lines, which then ran down the middle of the broad carriageway. The driver of the truck stopped and fetched two policemen, one of whom questioned Packy briefly before she fell into a coma, which she did not recover before she died in Sydney Hospital the next day. Packy McDougall was a musician and a pioneering suffragette. She had been running a bohemian club in rooms at 219 Elizabeth Street for over 15 years. The eponymic Packy's Club was a well-known resort for leading Australian intellectuals and their crowd of hangers-on, and Packy's kindness and tolerance were legendary among them. The club had been partly decorated by Walter Burley Griffin, American designer of the original plan for Australia's national capital, Canberra, in association with his wife, Marion Mahoney Griffin. The inquest into her death was held in what might be considered a rather perfunctory manner at the long-since demolished city's coroner's court at the Rocks in Sydney, May 21st, 1945. Packy's son, Robert McDougall, gave evidence that his mother was not suicidal. He stated tersely that Packy was not depressed and also that her hearing and vision were adequate. The driver of the lorry, Private Wilbur Judge, said that he was moving slowly and that Packy started across the road after having stopped on the tram lines. He braked but skidded and struck her with fatal consequences. One of the attending policemen said that Judge told him at the scene that Packy jumped in front of the truck and that he saw no skid marks on the road, although this may have been because it was raining and the road was wet. Uh-oh, there goes the plausible deniability. The other policeman stated that before she lost consciousness, Packy had said that she did not know what happened, and that he was unable to find any direct eyewitnesses among the onlookers. The sergeant at the police station where the driver was interviewed said the judge had told him that Packy suddenly continued to walk in the path of his truck, and that on inspecting the truck he could find no marks of the impact. Again, he could find no eyewitnesses. A lawyer attending for the Army managed to get the sergeant to agree that Judge had said in the station that Packy had jumped in front of the truck. Perhaps the intention of the Army was to imply that Packy had committed suicide rather than being the victim of negligent driving by a soldier, but this discrepancy was not pursued by the coroner. One can legitimately wonder about this in view of the peculiar circumstance that while 3 other traffic accidents in Sydney on that day were reported in major city newspapers, the accident resulting in Packy's death, that of a minor local celebrity, went completely unmentioned, with the exception of later death and funeral notices placed in the Sydney Morning Herald, presumably by Robin McDougall. In any case, the coroner asked no further questions of anyone and reached a verdict of accidental death. Quite possibly it was, but the number of deaths, which may have a bearing on our study, had probably already increased by 1 as Coroner Cookson made his findings. A few days after Packy's inquest had closed, on June 3rd, Sunday, 1945, a picnicker at the North Shore suburb of Mossman, across the harbor from the Central Business District, was looking for firewood when he made a different and highly unpleasant discovery: the severely decomposed body of a man. It was lying in bushland near the shore of Taylor's Bay, a large park across the point of Bradley's Head from Taronga Park Zoo. Police were fetched, and what was left of the body was eventually identified as having once been Joseph Hines Saul Marshall, a former citizen of Malaya who was 35 years old. George Marshall, as he preferred to be known, was from a wealthy and prominent family. One of his brothers, David... So, hold on a second. Just going back to Packy for a moment. So, there's allegations that Harkness might have been connected to these bohemian clubs, or her bohemian club. Not necessarily that it was a bad thing. Let's not go into that. Who knows what went on in that club, but whatever. So, the owner of the club is found dead, and then a short time later, this other guy's found dead with a copy of this book that they all happen to have. Okay. Okay. So let's continue here. George Marshall, as he preferred to be known, was from a wealthy and prominent family. One of his brothers, David Marshall, became the first chief minister of the newly independent Singapore in 1955. He had emigrated to Australia in 1939 after a quarrel with his father. His early ambition to become an author had ended in failure when his self-published book of poetry, Just You and I, had been badly received when it came out in 1931. In Australia, where 2 of his brothers were in business, Marshall had alternated between subsiding an income from property and working for the government. He had also alternated residences between Sydney and Perth on the other side of the continent. He had recently returned to Sydney and resumed residence in a flat in the inner-city suburb of Potts Point. Now he was lying dead in the bush in Mossman with a copy of the Rubaiyat open on his chest. Marshall's inquest, again presided over by Cookson, opened on July 18th. Marshall's brother Sal spoke of his younger brother's history of suicide attempts. He had been briefly institutionalized in Perth in January 1945 after an unsuccessful attempt. In the hospital, he had received insulin therapy, a now discredited technique in which patients were placed, sometimes on a daily basis, in artificially induced comas created by massive injections of insulin. That doesn't sound safe. During these comas, electroconvulsive shock treatment was sometimes applied as well. Patients were then brought back to consciousness by further massive injections of glucose. Sometimes they did not emerge from the coma. If they did, brain damage was not an unknown consequence of the treatment. After an adjournment lasting some days, the police spoke of finding the body with its head supported by a rock under which a copy of a Sydney newspaper of May 20th had been placed. A bottle of water and a tin containing a residual amount of toxic barbituric acid were beside the body. The rubaiyat was open and facing downwards on the chest, with either one or two quatrains, again accounts differ, marked in pencil. There is no mention of a corresponding pencil having been found on the body. In fact, the police said that they had only identified the body in late June after being contacted by Marshall's former landlord, as, like Somerton Man, there was nothing amongst the apparel of the deceased to identify him by. Marshall's landlord said that he had last seen his tenant on May 18th, and he had contacted the police after hearing of the discovery of an unidentified body in Mossman. A former headmaster of Marshall's, now retired in Sydney, spoke of his having stayed in touch with his pupil who had a first-class philosophical mind, and how Marshall had a deep interest in the rubaiyat. Unlike Marshall's brother Sal, the headmaster did not accept the suicide theory, believing that the appeal would have been rather towards a living solution than towards unsolved ending. The headmaster last saw Marshall late on the night of Saturday, May 19th, when he seemed full of good spirits. Next on this, okay, so few notes here, citations. It may be significant that Sal Marshall spoke of his brother David having received head injuries in a childhood car accident, and that his knowledge of David Marshall's 1945 suicide attempt came from a mutual friend who was alarmed to be asked by David Marshall to pass on certain papers to a third party, since he said he was going away to the country and might not return. As Cookson did not inquire further into these matters, we presently know nothing more. So this is a second or third-hand account. So there might not have been any suicide attempts. Interesting. Next on the stand was a young woman called Gwyneth Dorothy Graham. She began by falsely stating that she was living with her parents in Rockdale in southern Sydney. She said that she had been very friendly with Marshall for several years, but not had heard much from him since he moved to Perth. In April 1945, Marshall had returned to Sydney, and they had seen each other regularly since. On May 19th, they had dined together, on which occasion Marshall told Graham that he had sent her a check for £200, about 30 times the average weekly wage, to enable her to realize her long-expressed desire to establish her own hairdressing salon. She tendered the note, which eventually arrived with a check, and spoke of Marshall's extremely temperamental and domineering manner. She had not seen him since they parted in the street following their dinner, after she complained of a headache. Cookson asked no further questions and quickly ruled Marshall's death a suicide. This decision was reached on August 13th, 4 days after the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. The Sydney scandal sheet Truth naturally found the material irresistible with the combination of poetry, exoticism — the dark Marshall was from a Jewish family — implicit sex and suicide, and it made the events the subject of a story in its edition of the August 19th Sunday edition. A few days later, Gwen Graham was the subject of more newspaper reporting. On August 26th, she joined Marshall in death. Graham's inquest once again presided over by Cookson. I mean, is this like that guy? Is this like the guy in Seattle who's doing the Cobain autopsy? He's doing the Pfaff autopsy, and he's connected to Courtney Love, and he doesn't find anything suspicious about anything. I mean, this reminds me of that. I mean, it's the same guy doing all these inquests here. Opened September 14th, a fortnight after the official signing of Japan's surrender. Her mother was the first to be called. She said she had last seen her daughter alive on August 21st at the hairdressing salon in King's Cross where Graham had worked. Graham was not happy on the day of the inquest on Mr. Marshall. Contrary to her evidence at Marshall's inquest, Graham was not living with her parents but was cohabitating with a soldier named Helmut Hendon in King's Cross, a suburb adjacent to Potts Point where Marshall had lived. Speaking of Marshall by another of his adopted names, Lorenzo, Graham's mother said that the last time she had spoken to her daughter, she had been told that Lorenzo told her to break from Hendon, that he was evil, and that Graham herself had discovered that he was both evil and ruthless too. Wait a second. That Hendon was evil? The phrasing is, I'm not understanding the phrasing here. Her daughter had been told Lorenzo told her to take a break from Hendon, that he was evil. So Lorenzo is telling her that Hendo is evil. Graham herself discovered he was both evil and ruthless too. Is she speaking of Marshall or of Hendon? Without asking any further questions of Graham's mother, Cookson proceeded to call Hendon to the stand. Private Helmet, or again, now we have another guy connected to the military here, surrounding all these deaths. Private Helmet, or Helmut, or Helmuth, all three variations are recorded. Hendon declared that Graham had been living in his flat since December 1944, and he had known her since January that year. She stayed in the flat while he had been in the hospital and away on army business, and he lived there as well when he was on leave. She had told him in May of receiving the money from Marshall. She had sent the check back when it was returned unclaimed. She had paid the money into her own bank account. Hendon stated that the death of Marshall seemed to upset her, but that she had said, quote, she understood that when a man had nothing to live for, he would take his own life, end quote. Is that convenient? The rest of his evidence was as straightforward as anything can be said to be in this bizarre manner. According to Hendon, the landlady of the block of flats where he lived was scandalized at the couple's de facto status, and on the night Graham died, he had suggested that she leave the flat and go back and live at home, whereupon she went into the bathroom, ran a bath, got into it, slashed her wrists. When she did not respond to his eventual knocking at the door, he went into the room and found her floating in the bath with her face down. He removed her from the water and fetched a doctor who lived in the building. Cookson asked Hendon no further questions and did not call the landlady or the doctor in question. He took perfunctory evidence from the police, who found no marks of violence on the body other than the cuts to the wrists, and declared that unspecified further inquiries established that there are no suspicious circumstances. And with that, the case of Gwyneth Dorothy Graham was closed, as is almost completely the narrative portion of our present story. Reflections, connections, question mark. So just for clarification, Gwyneth tried to return the check that George Marshall gave her, but the check was not accepted, returned back. So at that point, she put it into her own account. And George Marshall had warned Gwyneth about Mr. Hendon, calling him evil and ruthless. And Gwyneth confided in her mother just how true George Marshall's warning had been. So she told her own mother that Helmut Hendon was evil and ruthless. And again, just going by basic crime statistics, when a female is found dead, most of the time it's the significant other. Furthermore here, according to testimony given by Helmut Hendon the night of her death, he and Gwyneth had been out. They had returned home at 11 p.m. At 1:30 a.m., she had said, I want to have a hot bath. Leave me alone. I want to think. Later, Mr. Hendon had called out to her but got no reply. Going into the bathroom, he saw her face down in the bath, the water stained with her blood. Police Sergeant Marsh stated that there was a new cake of soap that had not been used and a safety razor blade beside the bath. He added that the girl's garments were placed tidily, one on top of the other, in a corner of the bathroom. Huh. So the obvious motive here is, does Helmut Hendon want the money that Marshall gave her? Or possibly some other domestic issues. But continuing on here with this paper here, Ginsburg says astutely that any document, even the most anomalous, can be inserted into a series. He also points out that in any society, the conditions of access to the production of documentation are tied to a situation of power and thus create an inherent imbalance. Wow, shout out to the Maura Murray case there. We recall the fact that Packy's accident and death were seemingly not reported in the prosaic way that the other similar events were on the same day, and wonder at least mildly about the possible relations of power and documentation in this matter. So we have military involved in all of this, like across the board. Packy, who runs the Bohemian Club, which may have included all these individuals as members, she's hit by a soldier. And then there's some weirdness. Then we have this woman turns up dead, and she's living with a soldier. One of the original investigating detectives into the Somerton case, Lionel Leon, told the same Australian Broadcasting Company TV team, which interviewed Alf Boxall in 1978, that while he was investigating the discovery of the body, he had found a hypodermic syringe at the scene. What? But Leon did not mention this during his evidence to the 1949 inquest, and the ABC documentary omitted the portion of this interview. Why? What? They found a syringe at the scene? Wow. Okay. This is getting more and more mind-shocking. And then, so that was covered up and then never mentioned again? Okay, continuing on here. The available life story of Helmut Hendon is an enigma in its own right, above and beyond his involvement in this case. He was born Heinz Helmut Honig in Berlin in 1909. His early life remains almost entirely opaque before his arrival in Australia as a stateless refugee in 1937. But he came from Spain, then enduring the agonies of civil war, and claimed to have been one of that nation's leading broadcasters. I have not yet been able to unearth any evidence to substantiate his claim, but nevertheless, within 6 months of his arrival in Australia, after changing his name, he was giving lectures on international politics over ABC radio. What? Okay, so this is a prominent guy here, so he's involved in international politics. His girlfriend found dead in the apartment while he was there, who happened to be a witness at an inquest regarding the death of Marshall, whose brother became the chief minister of Singapore. So this guy's got not only connections to the military here, but connections to international politics, and he's giving lectures on ABC radio. Wow, just when we think the mind shocks can't get any crazier, I mean, we're going down crazy rabbit holes here. How did he get into the national broadcaster so quickly? Exactly what did he have to say of it? He also lectured on international politics and radio broadcasting at Packy's Club at least twice prior to World War II. Okay, all right, I mean, wow, so we have direct connections. He's got direct connections to 3 of these people that ended up dead. What the heck? In 1943, he was apparently conscripted into the Army, where he was placed in an employment company, a special unarmed rear echelon unit for, quote, enemy aliens, end quote, where they could be safely watched. Despite all his apparent gifts, he remained a private throughout his perhaps reluctant service, and his service record largely consists of episodes of hospitalization for rheumatism and episodes of going absent without leave. One of these occurs from May 6th to 7th, 1945, the morning of the day on which Packy fatally encountered the army truck. Oh man, these rabbit holes are getting deep. After the death of Dorothy Graham in his flat and his discharge from the army a few months later, Hendon attempted to become an actor and writer. When these efforts came to nothing, he married and went into business with a jewelry wholesaler. By the 50s, he was prosperous enough to buy a house in Castle Crag, the exclusive North Shore suburb planned by Burley Griffin and once inhabited by Packy McDougal. I can as of yet find no record of his presumed death and burial, but he disappears from the Australian electoral record in the late 60s. So this guy, there's no history, and then there's no history of his first half of his life, almost. There's no history of the end of his life? What is going on here? Alf Boxall died in retirement in Canberra in 95, adding nothing further to his views on the case. Justin Harkness eventually married the car dealer she had passed off to the Adelaide police as her husband, at the time that he was not her husband, and as mentioned, she died in 2007, again without adding anything more to the case to the public record. Packy's Club was taken over by Robin McDougal and continued operating until its closure in 1966, although without ever regaining its pre-war status. Wait, what? Robin McDougal? Did Harkness name her son after the Robin McDougal connection in the Packy's Club? What? That's my question mark here. This isn't stated in the paper, but the name Robin again. Wow. What is going on here? Okay, now, even crazier here, Hendon's name appears sporadically in its guest book, preserved in the National Library of Australia until the early 60s, as do those of contemporary intellectuals such as Xavier Herbert, Al Boxall's World War II colleague. So Boxall is also tied to Packy's Club. as well as Helmut Hendon. And Jessica Harkness rumored to also be connected to the club. Again, just rumored, but let's continue here. Also, Miles Franklin is in this Packies Club guest book. The names of Boxall, Graham, Harkness, and Marshall have never been identified in the book, although since it was apparently only used on special occasions, this does not preclude their presence there. What's weird here, explaining his movements before the death of Dorothy Graham, Hendon was careful to stipulate to the coroner, Cookson, that the day before her death, he had visited Packies in Elizabeth Street. Although what bearing this had on the situation, he did not explain. What? So he offered that information? That he went to Packies Club the day before her... What? The day before Dorothy Graham's death. What? In 1947, a radio chess match was held between members of the long-established chess club at Packies Club and players in Canada. The moves were transmitted by radio using a special chess code called Gringmuth notation. The code resembles the letter sequences found in the back of the Adelaide Rubaiyat. In fact, there is only one letter in the Rubaiyat code which does not appear in the Gringmuth notation, although as a description of a chess match, the Rubaiyat code is meaningless gibberish. Well, that's weird. Does this have any significance? Perhaps. In fact, it might be the occasion for a certain juxtaposition of the microhistory of Somerton Man with broader global politics. One of the attendees at the chess match in Sydney in 1947 was Fyodor Nosov, the TASS correspondent in Sydney, an alleged asset of Soviet intelligence. Nosov's name would later figure into the famous Petrov affair, the sensational defection of two married Russian diplomatic staff in Australia in 1954 amid allegations of widespread Russian penetration of the Australian government. In fact, an Australian weblog maintained by former intelligence agents has recently identified the Somerton Man as Pavel Ivanovich Fedosimov, the former deputy vice consul in New York and the alleged NKVD resident, roughly intelligence station chief, there until his recall to Russia in late July 48, after which his movements are unknown. This attribution may be more convincing than others. Fedosimov had been the handler for American atomic spies until the American Venona program of decryption of intercepted Russian radio communications began to close in on them at this time. South Australia in 1948 was not only the center of the incipient British missile testing system, but was also reputed to be the location of rich new deposits of uranium ore. It was also claimed to be the location of a Venona intercept station. Fedosimov certainly would have had pressing reasons to be in Adelaide in late 48, but he is also said to have subsequently served as a delegate to a Russian delegation at a meeting of the International Atomic Energy Agency in the late 50s. This is not a confirmed sighting, however, and research is proceeding. Okay, wow. What does everybody think? Does he look like the Somerton Man? I mean, wow. Huh. So the problem here is there's photographs of Pavel here and his teeth. It looks like he's got some issues with his teeth. Are these the same issues? I mean, I mean, this is a rare condition, so could that match the Somerton Man? But the problem is here, again, these images purported to be of Fedosimov might not be, because it's standard practice in Russian intelligence to use different names. So the actual people are not this name would have belonged to somebody else. So it's impossible to match all of this. But I mean, it's kind of hard to gauge from a lot of these photographs, like the shape of the ear. I mean, they do look similar, but the angles are all different in the. So apparently, Pavel Ivanovich Fedosimov was last seen in 1948 boarding a ship for Russia. That's the last confirmed sighting. After that, there's either rumored sightings or names on papers, which may or may not even be the same guy. And if identities are swapped, this guy who this photo of, who was acting as Fedosimov, might not have actually been him. So even if this guy is the Somerton Man who did act as Fedosimov, that doesn't necessarily mean he was him. This might not necessarily be his actual identity. I mean, the resemblance is, it's kind of there. Now, other evidence here that some people use is that there's a book by Senator Kavanaugh in 1970, The Atomic Spies. In this book, there's a page that describes a meeting of the spy Harry Gold with a man that matched the description of the Somerton Man. He was tall, walked on the balls of his feet, and was a spy master. And this guy, this name and description also is in a few other different books. Other people state that they do look very similar, but not exact. So it might simply be a relative of this Fedosimov guy, which is also an interesting theory, even if it's not him. It might be a relative of his, and he might also be involved in the spy trade. Okay, let's continue here. The American source of some of the clothing and impedimenta of Somerton Man is also explained if they were being used by Fedosimov himself recently in America, although of course this contradicts the American origin of the body alleged by DNA testing. Also, if there is a far-reaching conspiracy, would the DNA sample have been swapped? Again, nobody wants to talk about that. Everybody always puts blind faith in chain of custody. But if there is some kind of far-reaching government conspiracy with spies, how hard would it be for them to get somebody in there to swap a sample? I mean, you know. Okay, the origin story itself is contestable. However, as it was conducted on samples from Somerton Man's alleged son by Jestons rather than the body of Somerton Man itself, exhumation for this purpose having been refused by the South Australian government. So this was written before the recent exhumation, so we'll see. Nevertheless, there are also problems with the conventional explanation of Fedosimov's supposed arrival in Adelaide. This assumes that he arrived undercover as a member of a Russian delegation to a UN economic conference which was being held outside Sydney in December 1948. According to surveillance material gathered by the embryonic Australian intelligence organization, ASIO, one man and one woman from the delegation apparently went missing during their aircraft's refueling stopover in Darwin in Northern Australia the day before Somerton Man was first seen on the beach. What? Another coincidence here. It is just conceivable that, assuming the man was actually Fedosimov and headed for Adelaide, he managed to get there overnight, a feat of considerable difficulty, and died on the beach the next day in pursuit of some opaque goal. However, if that was the case, and then Fedosimov also managed to fit in a stop at an Australian haberdashery to acquire a pair of trousers which had been made in Victoria, and also acquired some thread to mend them as well as the time needed to do so, unless someone else did that. I mean, there's no proof he was the one that mended them, right? And if he just simply got a pair of clothes, somebody else could have handed those to him from once he arrived in Australia. Again, this is all conjecture. Clearly, all of this is very much a subject in a state of considerable flux, which various intriguing leads still remaining to be followed. But in conclusion, the patient reader may be asking what there is which actually formally connects Somerton Man to Packy's Club to Boxall, Jeston Nexus, and any of it at all to the unfortunate Marshall. The candid answer must be nothing yet, at least not directly. And yet Marshall's body, complete with the rubaiyat, arrived in the record at about the same time and almost around the corner from the pub in Mossman where another rubaiyat was exchanged between acquaintances. The Adelaide rubaiyat, long since lost, is said to be such a rare edition that a precise duplicate has never been located, leading some to speculate that it was a special one-off edition used for espionage purposes. Perhaps it was, but the same claim had been used about the Marshall rubaiyat, whereas I located a copy of that edition in the rare books section of the American University Library. One should not get carried away into conspiracy theories. For example, claims about the existence of micro-writing in the Adelaide rubaiyat code seem hard to sustain given that they are being made on the basis of a heavily enlarged copy of a photograph of a tracing of some faint impressions made on a page which no longer exists. And how convenient is that where all this evidence is just missing? Even so, it is at least a little bit odd that the Boxall Rubaiyat, which survived at least until Boxall showed it to the ABC in 1978, is a dual language edition, which was translated by a professor who was credited with having done unspecified intelligence work for the Australian Army during the war. The second language is that of the late George Marshall's home, Malay. Later, Singapore. Okay, all right. The coincidence stack is now at stratospheric levels. Okay, so this particular Rubaiyat that Boxall displayed, it's a dual language edition translated by a professor who did intelligence work for the army. So, what are the chances? Okay, oh man, this is rough. What are the chances that Harkness is giving this book? Did she even really give him the book? He said she did. Is that the truth, though? Like, how do we know that's true? Were there any witnesses to this exchange? Or did they routinely give the book back and forth with code in it, and that was simply one exchange? You have now the guy found right adjacent to that exchange, right next to the hotel, is Marshall, who happens to be from the country where the professor who translated this dual language edition book, which Boxall has, is from that same country. The coincidence stack, we're done here. This coincidence stack is stratospheric. The chances of all these things being accidental, what is going on here? Is microhistory mocking its adherents with still another ultimately meaningless coincidence? Ginsburg says that obstacles to microhistorical research must become part of the account of that research, like lacunae in the sources. If the purpose of history is the search for meaning in events which have already taken place, what is one to do if studies suggest that the events being considered have no meaning? As I tried to, here's the thing though, out of what, hundreds of different professions, we have all these military connections. Out of literally hundreds of countries and languages, we happen to have this translator who happened to also work for the military with this particular edition. But it could have been any book ever. Not only was it that particular book, which is also found on Marshall's body, not only was it that particular book that was written, like the page was ripped out of in Somerton, it was all this particular book, and now also this particular translator, with connection to the country where this guy came from, whose brother ended up being the first chief minister of. Statistically here, what are the chances of all of this? Out of all the books in print, out of all the countries in the world, out of all the professions, we just so happen to have these line up. Come on. Coincidence theorists must be having a field day here. There's more coincidence than you can shake a stick at now. As I tried to work towards some sort of understanding of these events, the incompleteness of the record proved frustrating. But one thing seemed fairly clear. Whatever was taking place could not be understood, if it was to be understood at all, outside of the larger geopolitical milieu in which it was embedded. A few general remarks on this broader context will therefore bring this text to a close rather than a conclusion. A Dead Man on the Beach, The Dance of Politics. The story of Somerton Man took place in the context of early Cold War Australia, amidst nuclear shadowboxing, which would require a book to fully clarify. At the time at which the man was found dead on the beach, the British government had been frozen out of nuclear weapons research by the Americans, breaching a wartime agreement made between Churchill and Roosevelt, but not honored by Truman. The Australian government had been declared a security risk by the Americans in May 1948 due to the Venona intercepts, revealing a high-level leak in the Australian government. The Australian government was already lending support to the British weapons testing programs with personnel and territory, particularly the Anglo-Australian Long-Range Weapons Establishment, or as it had eventually become known as the Woomera Rocket Range in South Australia. The Australian government apparently accepted that it would be denied access to any resulting technology. A major influence on the British Labour government's decision to pursue their own nuclear capability was the wish to maintain prestige against the Americans as much as to deter the Russians. There was also a fear of uranium shortage at the major source for both American and British uranium ore at the time, the Shinkolobwe mine in the Congo. And as we have seen, South Australia was something of a crossroads for all these powerful interests. It is notable that when the official inquiries into the death of Somerton Man were finally closed by the same coroner in South Australia in 1958, the second inquest document consisted almost entirely of a carbon copy of the first document, with some general closing remarks being added by Cleland. Despite the finding of the Adelaide Rubaiyat having been made just a month after the adjournment sine die to some other day of the first inquest, despite the discovery of the code in the book and the all world around publicity given to it, despite the involvement of Justin Harkness and Alf Boxall in the case, however, peripherally, not a single one of these matters is even mentioned in the official document which is supposed to close the official deliberations on the case, created and signed off with an open verdict by the same official who presided over the first inquiry. Does this not strike the reader as a somewhat remarkable oversight under the circumstances? Still, the atomic connection in toto, like the identification of Fedosimov, remains speculative, however plausible. Other theories have been suggested, many of them which the interested reader can easily find for him or herself. It is often claimed that the death of George Marshall and other events in Sydney in 1945 are not related to the main case. While it is certainly still a possibility that all of these very strange events are unrelated, and the thread of the Rubaiyat weaving through this cavalcade of death really is, as Boxall put it, an astonishing coincidence, I would suggest that I have offered some tentative evidence to the contrary. Now, hold on one second, though. I just had another theory here. Maybe we call this the Maguire theory in the Somerton case. If Harkness fell in love with this spy who's pretending to work for Australia, if she's not a Russian spy, let's say she's an Australian spy maybe, or if she's not a spy at all, whatever, she thinks Fedosimov, or whoever this guy is a good guy. She falls in love with him, whatever. Then, if she is a spy, perhaps there's an order put out to kill him, so she has to poison him. Now, how tragic of a story is this if she already had his child, and the order comes down? Maybe she refuses the order. Perhaps he commits suicide because she refused the order, and he didn't want her to get in trouble with her country. I mean, there's so many layers here of a possible 4D chess Romeo and Juliet story where it's just so difficult. But is this why she's overcome with emotion? Is this why she wants her name left out of everything? And I mean, there's certainly, the coincidence stack is so freaking high now. And there's actually more. We are not done, believe it or not. All the Mindshock listeners. Let me read his postscripts here on this paper here. We began this paper with some reflections on Carlo Ginzburg's warning about the futility of what one might call speculative microhistory, specifically the notion expressed by the author of the microhistorical Your Text Pickett's Charge, which the outcome of a decision to charge a single particular cavalry unit at the Battle of Gettysburg may have materially influenced the outcome of the entire American Civil War. In a very worthwhile sequence of reflections on this question, Jill Lepore points out from an American perspective that there is no American school of microhistory, no mission statement, and few, if any, self-professed practitioners. This was in 2001. So we are left to define the genre by its examples, except that, if my suspicion is correct, no one agrees on what those examples are. She then points out a little subversively that none of the hitherto obscure people, a term Lepore cites from a conference's papers call, who have been the subject of microhistorical studies were actually particularly obscure or mundane in their own lives, including Ginzburg's Minocchio. As Lepore points out, these stories are epics. Instead, Lepore suggests the subject of microhistory rests not in its uniqueness, but its exemplariness, in how that individual's life served as an allegory for broader issues affecting the culture as a whole. In his paper discussing the nature of microhistory, Ginzburg cites Tolstoy's War and Peace as the origin of his and Tolstoy's conviction that a historical phenomenon can become comprehensible only by reconstructing the activities of all the persons who participated in it. I'm going to have to start using that. I mean, that is good. Let me repeat that. A historical phenomenon can become comprehensible only by reconstructing the activities of all persons who participated in it. I believe that applying just these principles to the Somerton Man case, coupled with the acceptance of incompleteness both in the sense of unanswered and possibly unanswerable questions and numerous lacunae in sources, it precisely what distinguishes this study as microhistory rather than biography or conspiracy theory. The Somerton case, as it appears in the light of my research, is, amongst other things, a story of individuals interacting through and participating in historical currents at least partly beyond their control. I was not consciously aware of conforming to microhistorical principles while I was conducting my research, but the idealistic socialism of Packy McDougall, the energetic ambition of the evil and ruthless cosmopolitan Helmut Hendon, even the recurrence of the ersatz Orientalism of Fitzgerald's Rubaiyat itself, now so antiquated but highly influential at the time, and especially the hints of atomic espionage, which seem to be constantly at the periphery of the Adelaide part of the story, all serve to illuminate in their own small ways the broader canvas of Australian and indeed global history at a time of deep and tumultuous transformation. Whether Somerton Man was in fact some species of atomic spy or not, speculation about this possibility may help to emphasize the significance of contemporary atomic politics, which, as we have seen, impelled the Australian Prime Minister Ben Chifley to give his reluctant consent to British oversight in the reform of Australian security services in 1948 to form the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, ASIO. This was a decision on the part of a left-leaning Labour Prime Minister which puzzled contemporary observers and has only been interpreted in the context of Venona comparatively recently. In this way, microhistory might perhaps be useful thought of as a different and broader kind of section through the cone of history. The history of great men who give the orders is a small perfect circle taken from at or near the apex. The history of you and me who execute, resist, and do most of the endurance of the consequences of these orders is a far broader elliptical section taken from much lower down. Both sections are useful to the description of the overall figure. Neither is sufficient in itself. Is it possible they might even be complementary? So very, very astute points made in this paper by Rowan Holmes here. Big shout out to Rowan Holmes, excellent author here in Global History's A Student Journal. So we actually are not even done here. So there is yet another mysterious death here. June 6, 1949, the body of 2-year-old Clive Magnusson was found in a sack in the Largs Bay Sandhills, about 20 kilometers, 12 miles, up the coast from Somerton Park. Lying next to him was his unconscious father, Keith Waldemar Magnusson. The father was taken to a hospital in a very weak condition. Suffering from exposure, following a medical examination, he was transferred to a mental hospital. The Magnussons had been missing for 4 days. The police believed that Clive had been dead for 24 hours when his body was found. The two were found by Neil McRae of Largs Bay, who claimed he had seen the location of the two in a dream the night before. So just when you think this case is not getting any stranger, and the possibly associated cases are not getting any stranger, now we have visions and dreams now. Okay. The coroner could not determine the young Magnusson's cause of death, although it was not believed to be natural causes. The contents of the boy's stomach were sent to a government analyst for further examination. Following the death, the boy's mother, Roma Magnusson, reported having been threatened by a masked man while driving a battered cream car, almost ran her down outside her home in Cheapside Street, Largs North. Magnusson stated that the car stopped and a man with a khaki handkerchief over his face told her to keep away from the police or else. Additionally, a similar-looking man had been recently seen lurking around the house. Magnusson believed the situation was related to her husband's attempt to identify the Somerton Man, believing him to be Carl Thompson, who had worked with him in Renmark in 1939. No, you are not mishearing me. The name is Carl Thompson with a P, not Thompson without the P and an O instead of the E. But that's kind of close. That's kind of close to Harkness's new name and, of course, Prosper Thompson. Now we have a Carl Thompson who apparently worked. So Yeah, Keith Waldemar Magnusson, believed to have worked with the Somerton Man, who he believed was Carl Thompson, who worked with him in Renmark. Renmark is a small town in South Australia in 1939. Soon after being interviewed by police over her harassment, Magnusson collapsed and required medical treatment. What is going on here? J.M. Gower, secretary of the Largs North Progress Association, received anonymous phone calls threatening that Mrs. Magnusson would meet with an accident if he interfered, while A.H. Curtis, the acting mayor of Port Adelaide, received 3 anonymous phone calls threatening an accident if he stuck his nose into the Magnusson affair. Police suspect the calls may be a hoax, and the caller may be the same person who also terrorized a woman in a nearby suburb who had recently lost her husband in tragic circumstances. What is going on here? Wow, so if this is spy related, I mean, normally you would think they wouldn't want to draw attention to themselves. So is it possible that the death of 2-year-old Clive and possibly Keith Waldemar Magnusson, that was related to the spy ring, but the following threats and otherwise, was that outsourced by the spies? Or was it simply, I mean, there are loonies in the world, so let's not fall for false dichotomies. But it's simply, I mean, the coincidence stack here. This is just 1 year after the Somerton Man turns up dead. I mean, the coincidence stack here is a mile high. Yeah, I mean, it's just really, really crazy. There is yet another case that is cited. Now, this one's not quite as direct. November 1970, so many years later, an unidentified woman's body is found in Bergen, Norway. The subsequent case found some eerie similarities to the Somerton Man, including identifying marks and labels removed from belongings, suitcases later found at a nearby railway station, and signs of poison. As of 2019, the case is still developing. So this is the Isdal woman. And she is, as of yet, unidentified as of 2020. The police also, at the time, ruled it a likely suicide. And we'll be getting into her case in the next episode because we actually still have plenty more to go over. I mean, this case has definitely turned out to be a doozy. What a great request for Mindshock. I mean, there's so many rabbit holes here to explore in a logical fashion. And yeah, there's quite a bit more here. We're just kind of scratching the surface with this case. And again, just due to all of these spy and government conspiracy issues, it's possible that the DNA may have been swapped, and we might not really get an answer from the exhumation. But maybe we will, who knows? But hope you guys enjoyed another edition of the Mindshock podcast. You can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help support Mindshock. Help us get more mind-shocking content out there. And keep up awareness in some of these cold cases, unsolved cases, wrongful convictions, and more. You could also become a YouTube member for access to exclusive streams and chats. Like and share the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.